Picture a building so grand it looks like a palace. Now fill it with screaming. Add iron chains bolted to the walls, straw rotting on stone floors, the smell of 100 unwashed bodies pressed into corridors barely wider than your outstretched arms, and somewhere deep inside, in a room you will not be allowed to enter for your first 3 weeks, a man who has not seen daylight since the autumn of 1759. That's Bethlem Royal Hospital. That's Bedlam, the most famous madhouse in the world, the place that gave the English language its word for chaos, a building that people dressed in their finest clothes and paid good money to visit on Sunday afternoons, the way you might pay to see a play or an exhibition of exotic animals, because in 1763 the suffering of the insane was considered entertainment for the sane. We're going back there tonight, not as visitors, not as one of the fashionable ladies clutching a reticule and peering through the iron grate at the man chained to the wall and whispering, "Isn't it dreadful?" to her companion before they move on to look at the next one. We're living it. You're a keeper, one of the men who actually works here, who locks the doors and carries the buckets and sits in the dark long after the visitors have gone home, to their comfortable houses and their warm suppers and their uncomplicated minds. So, honestly, I have no idea if you listen to these episodes because you find pre-modern London genuinely fascinating, or because the sound of someone describing the conditions of an 18th century psychiatric institution is, for some reason that I refuse to examine too closely, relaxing. Both are valid. Subscribe if you want. Get comfortable. Here we go. Your name is Thomas Hadley. You are 19 years old. You arrived in London 6 weeks ago from a village outside Worcester with a letter of recommendation from the parish vicar, 17 shillings and 4pence, and absolutely no idea what you were getting into. The letter got you an interview with the steward. The interview got you a position. The position pays you 4 shillings a week, which is not much, but it includes a bed in the keeper's dormitory on the 2nd floor, and 2 meals a day from the hospital kitchen, and all the things that will never fully leave your memory no matter how old you eventually get. You have been here 6 weeks. You're beginning to understand what that means. The first thing you need to know about Bethlem is the smell. Not because it's the worst thing here. It isn't. But it's the first thing that hits you every single morning before you've had time to properly wake up, before your eyes have adjusted to the dim grey light coming through the small barred window above your cot, before you've remembered where you are. The smell finds you first. It comes up through the floorboards. It saturates the walls. It lives in the fabric of your blanket and the wool of your coat and the hair on your head. You have washed your face every morning for 6 weeks and you can still smell it on your own hands. It is not a single smell. It is a layer cake of smells, each one worse than the last. At the bottom, oldest, most settled, is the smell of the building itself. Stone that has been damp since the year the hospital moved here, which was 1676, which means this building is older than anyone alive and has been absorbing moisture and misery for nearly 90 years. The walls sweat in winter. The floors never fully dry. There is a particular cold, green, mineral smell that comes from old wet stone, and it underlies everything else the way a bass note underlies a piece of music. On top of that, straw. Old straw, unwashed straw, straw that has been slept on and vomited on, and worse. The patients' beds are straw. Their floor covering is straw. When it gets bad enough, someone changes it. When it doesn't get bad enough, no one does. You're still learning to tell the difference. Then the chamber pots. Emptied in the morning, yes, but not always early enough, not always thoroughly. And there are 120 patients in this building, give or take, depending on the week, and 120 chamber pots emptied into the same set of drains that were designed, you suspect, for about half that number. Then the bodies. The human animal in close confinement, without sufficient water for washing, without the freedom to move, without the basic dignity of regular clothing changes. You smell this on yourself now, if you're honest. You have not had a proper bath since you arrived. You've washed your face and your hands, and that's what you get. And underneath all of it, something else. Something you didn't have a word for when you first arrived and still don't. Quite. The smell of minds in distress. That sounds like something a novelist would write. You are not a novelist, but there is something in the air of this place that does not come from the straw, the drains, or the bodies. Something that smells like fear, or grief, or the particular chemical signature of a person who has stopped expecting anything good to happen. You have no idea if that's real or if you're imagining it. Welcome to Bethlem Royal Hospital, London, 1763. You're lying on your cot in the keeper's dormitory, and it is not quite 6 in the morning, and the bells of St. Giles Cripplegate are already going, which means you have approximately 20 minutes before headkeeper Robert Bain will bang on the dormitory door and tell you to get up. And you have learned that when Robert Bain tells you to get up, you're already late. The dormitory holds 6 cots, yourself and 5 other male keepers, though the 6 of you are rarely all asleep at the same time because the hospital runs at all hours and the overnight shift is covered by whoever drew the short straw. Last night it was Cook, a thick-necked man from Hackney who has worked here for 11 years and who you're not sure you trust exactly, but who you have decided is at least predictable, which in this place is nearly as good. You can hear him snoring 2 cots over. He came off his shift an hour ago, and he will sleep until noon and wake up wanting ale and no conversation, which is fine, because you don't have much conversation to offer. You sit up. The cold hits you immediately. The dormitory has a small fireplace, but it went out in the night, and the ashes are grey and cold, and the room is probably close to 40 degrees in terms of temperature, which is to say it is not warm, and the stone floor under your bare feet when you stand up is cold enough to make your teeth clench. Your clothes are where you left them, hung over the end of the cot because there is nowhere else to put them. A heavy linen shirt, a waistcoat that was somebody else's before it was yours and shows it, breeches, woolen stockings with a hole in the left heel that you keep meaning to mend, heavy shoes with iron buckles, the most important thing you own in this building because the floors in the patients' wards are uneven and wet, and you have already turned your ankle once in the dark. The coat last, grey-brown, heavy, built for work rather than appearance. You don't have a better coat. The one you wore on the journey from Worcester finally gave up in your 3rd week here, a seam giving way under the arm in a way that was beyond your ability to repair, and you sold what was left of it to a ragman on Moor Lane for 4p. By the time you're dressed, Bain is already banging. His actual knock sounds like someone hitting the door with a length of wood, which is probably what it is. Hadley. Ellis. Up. Ellis, who has the cot nearest the window, makes a sound that is not a word and rolls over. Ellis is 22 and has been here 8 months and has developed a philosophy about headkeepers that involves ignoring them for as long as possible and then apologising with great sincerity. It works for Ellis. You have not yet mastered it. You open the door. Bain is in the corridor, already dressed, already immaculate in the institutional way, coat buttoned and shoes buckled and his grey hair pulled back tight. He's 53 years old, and has worked at Bethlem for 27 years, and he looks at you the way a farmer looks at a field he's been tending for decades. Not affectionately exactly, but with the particular attention of a man who knows every furrow. "You're on the women's gallery this morning," he says. "This is not what you were expecting." "I thought, Dawson's sick, you're covering." You don't argue, you've learned that too. You nod and you follow him down the corridor and you begin your day. The building itself, because you need to understand the building, is a long rectangle running east to west along the north side of Moorfields. It is, from the outside, genuinely beautiful. 2 stories of Portland stone with a symmetrical facade and carved figures above the entrance gate representing 2 things: melancholy and raving madness, both depicted as men in chains, one limp and dejected, one straining against his bonds, both looking out at the street below with faces that someone once tried to make tragic and instead made merely resigned. Inside it is less beautiful. The ground floor is administrative. The steward's office, the physician's consulting room, the apothecary's dispensary, the kitchen, and the laundry. These rooms are kept clean. When visitors enter through the front gate, this is the Bethlem they are supposed to see. Orderly, institutional, the smell of lye soap rather than chamber pots. Up the stairs, which are wide enough at the bottom and narrow sharply toward the top, are the galleries. That is the word for them. Galleries. As if they were designed for looking at things, which, in a sense, they were. The North Gallery runs the length of the building's upper floor and is divided into cells. Each cell is roughly 6 feet by 8 feet, which is not much, and contains a straw bed and a chamber pot and a small window set high in the wall, barred, about 18 inches square. The cells line the gallery on one side. The gallery itself is open, a wide corridor with the cell doors on one wall, and the opposite wall containing large windows overlooking Moorfields. This is where the visitors walk. They come on Sundays mostly, though Mondays and Wednesdays are also popular. They pay a penny at the gate, which goes to the hospital's general fund, and they walk the gallery, and they look through the cell grates at the patients inside, and they discuss what they see in the same tone they might use to discuss a painting at the Royal Academy. Sometimes they bring children. You think about this for a moment, standing at the top of the stairs in the grey 6 o'clock morning light, before the gallery has woken up, before the first sounds have started. The children who are brought here by parents who think this is educational. The children who press their faces against the grates and stare at men and women who are chained to walls and ask their parents what is wrong with them and receive explanations that are not exactly wrong but are not exactly right either. Madness, loss of reason, God's punishment, humours out of balance, animal spirits disturbed. You have been here 6 weeks and you don't know what's wrong with most of the patients. You're not sure the physicians do either. But you know what doesn't help? What doesn't help is a Sunday gallery full of strangers staring and pointing and laughing. But that is not a thought you are allowed to say out loud. Not here. Not to Bain. Certainly not to the steward or the physician. You are a keeper. Your job is to keep. The women's gallery is on the upper floor, separated from the men's by a locked door at the centre of the corridor. There is a female head keeper for the women's gallery, a woman named Mrs. Durwood, who has the particular quality of someone who has made their peace with an impossible situation and now just gets on with it. She has forearms like a blacksmith, and a voice that can travel the length of the gallery without her raising it above a conversational tone. You find her frightening in a way that is entirely different from finding Bain frightening. Bain is frightening, because he is unpredictable. Mrs. Durwood is frightening because she is absolutely, completely predictable, and what she predicts is that you will not be adequate to the tasks she sets you. She is standing at the gallery door when you arrive, already holding a ring of keys. Hadley, she looks you up and down with the expression of someone who ordered beef and has received something less. Right, walk with me. The gallery at 6 in the morning is almost quiet. Almost. There is always sound in this building. Always. You stop noticing the background of it after a few days, the way you stop noticing the smell, or rather, the way you stop noticing it consciously, while some part of your brain continues to log it, all of it, and tuck it away somewhere it will retrieve unexpectedly at 4 in the morning for the rest of your life. A low murmuring from behind one of the cell doors, rhythmic and toneless, the sound of someone who's been talking to themselves for so long they've forgotten there's a distinction between saying something and thinking it. A scratching sound, slow and steady, from the third cell on the left, which you will later learn is Margaret Fielding, 41, who's been here for 3 years, and who marks the days on her cell wall with a nail she found in the straw, and has hidden successfully for 6 months because the scratching sound is so quiet and so regular that it's been absorbed into the ambient noise of the gallery. From somewhere further down, a sound you can't immediately identify, a wet, dragging sound, rhythmic, slow. You look at Mrs. Durwood. Anne Voss, she says, without looking at you. She rocks, has done for 2 years. Sometimes she stops for a while and you think she's better and then she starts again. She says it matter-of-factly. This is the tone of the institution. Things are matter-of-fact here. If you let them not be, you don't last. You understand this. You are trying to understand this. The first cell on the left is Mary Blanchard, who is 47 and was admitted 14 months ago after her husband died and she stopped eating and started seeing her dead children, of whom she had 4, all deceased before the age of 2. A fact you learned from her admission record and which has been sitting in your chest like a stone since you read it. She's sitting on her straw bed when Mrs. Durwood unlocks the cell door to let you look in, sitting very still, hands folded in her lap looking at the wall. She doesn't look up when the door opens. "Good morning, Mrs. Blanchard," Mrs. Durwood says. Nothing. "Chamber pot first," Mrs. Durwood says to you. Then fresh water, fresh straw when the supply comes up from the yard, bread and whatever's in the kitchen pot for breakfast. She says this with the efficiency of a woman reciting a list she's recited approximately 3,000 times, which is probably accurate. You nod. She locks the door again. You move to the next cell. This is how the morning starts. This is how it starts every morning. The great institutional routine of Bethlem, which has been running in essentially this form for decades, and will, as far as you can tell, continue to run in this form indefinitely. Because the alternative, actually thinking about whether it works, is not something anyone here has time for. You're carrying a bucket, a heavy wooden bucket, because metal makes too much noise, and in the morning, noise before the proper waking hour is frowned upon, not for the patient's sake, but for the sake of the staff who sleep in the building. You carry the bucket from cell to cell, collecting chamber pots, rinsing them in the sluice at the end of the gallery, returning them. The smell of the sluice is something else entirely. The sluice room is a small stone closet at the eastern end of the gallery. There is a drain in the floor and a tap that produces cold water. Cold always. There is no hot water in the sluice. There is no hot water anywhere in this part of the building except what is heated in the kitchen and carried up in pots that grow cold before they arrive. You rinse the chamber pots and you try not to breathe too deeply, and you get good. over the 6 weeks, at breathing through your mouth and thinking about other things. This morning you think about Worcester, the particular smell of the barley fields in late summer, which is the opposite of every smell in this room. The sound of the river, the way your mother made bread, the bread always heavier on one side than the other because the oven in the cottage was warmer at the back and she always forgot to turn it. You haven't written to her since you arrived. You keep meaning to. You don't. By the time you've finished the chamber pots, the gallery is fully awake. This is the word that occurs to you, awake, though it is not entirely accurate. Bethlem in the morning is not awake the way a normal place is awake. It is not the clean, forward-moving wakefulness of people rising to begin their days. It is something more like the turning of a machine, gears engaging, processes beginning, the same processes that began yesterday and will begin tomorrow, grinding forward in their grooves. The murmuring from the third cell has intensified. Through the grate you can see a woman sitting in the corner, arms wrapped around her knees, words streaming from her lips in a low, continuous flow. She's perhaps 30, though it is hard to judge. The gallery does things to people's faces, hollows them out, takes the light from them. She doesn't look at you. 2 cells down, a woman is standing at her door, both hands gripping the iron grate, looking out at the gallery with an expression you can't read. Not distress exactly, not anger, something more like attention, acute, focused attention, as if she is gathering data. "That's Sarah Dobbs," Mrs. Durwood says, appearing at your shoulder. "Admitted 3 months ago, schoolteacher's wife from Islington. Her husband said she became ungovernable." Ungovernable? Wouldn't stay in the house, wouldn't stop arguing with him, kept writing letters to people he didn't approve of. You look at Sarah Dobbs. She's looking back at you with those sharp, data-gathering eyes. Is she... You don't know how to finish that sentence. "Mad?" Mrs. Durwood says. "That's not my department. The physician says she is. The husband signed the papers." She walks on. Sarah Dobbs watches you follow Mrs. Durwood down the gallery. You can feel her eyes on your back until you turn the corner. Breakfast comes up from the kitchen at 7. 2 of the kitchen boys carry it in large pots up the stairs, following you from cell to cell while you unlock, and Mrs. Durwood stands in the doorway with her presence, which is its own kind of restraint. The food is bread, and a thin broth that is mostly water, and something that might have been a vegetable at some earlier point in its existence. You've eaten this same broth at the staff table. It tastes the same there as it does here. Nobody is eating better than anyone else in this building, not by much. This is, you think, one of the few genuine equalities of Bethlem. The physician eats elsewhere. The third cell on your morning circuit is Elizabeth Crane, and Elizabeth Crane is the reason you've been thinking about Worcester. She came in 4 weeks ago, admitted while you were still learning your way around the building, and you saw them bring her in from the street entrance. 2 men holding her arms, a physician walking ahead with his case. She was very quiet. That was what you noticed. People you've seen brought in since are usually not quiet. They are resistant, or weeping, or making sounds that don't resolve into words. Elizabeth Crane was quiet. She walked between the 2 men as if she was being escorted somewhere, as if this was an arrangement she'd agreed to and was simply carrying out. She is 43, from Aldgate. Her record says melancholia and religious disturbance, and lists a husband and 3 children, none of whom have visited. Every morning when you unlock her cell for the breakfast distribution, she says the same thing. "Good morning. Are my children coming today?" Every morning you say, "I don't know, Mrs. Crane." And every morning she says, "Please ask someone. Thomas needs his winter coat. I don't think he has it." Thomas is her youngest. He is 14. Whether he has his winter coat or not, you genuinely don't know. You have no way of finding out. No one in this building has the time or the authority or the interest in finding out whether a 14-year-old boy in Aldgate has his winter coat. But every morning you say, "I'll ask Mrs. Crane." Mrs. Durwood has noticed. She hasn't said anything yet. You know she will. You finish the morning round by 8, which means you've been on your feet for 2 hours carrying buckets and pots up and down a stone-floored gallery, and your feet hurt and your back hurts and your hands are red from the cold water in the sluice. You stand at the window at the end of the gallery and look out over Moorfields for 30 seconds, which is about as much rest as you're going to get. Moorfields is already busy. Carters and tradesmen and early morning pedestrians moving across the wide open space. The city going about its business. Ordinary, purposeful, completely indifferent to the building behind you and everything inside it. You turn away from the window. There are 12 cells on the women's gallery. 12 women. You now know all their names and most of their records. This is not something Bain told you to do. You taught yourself to read the admission books in your first week because you needed to understand what you were dealing with, and Bain either didn't notice or didn't care. The admission books sit in the steward's office and you're technically not supposed to go in there without being summoned. But the steward goes out at noon every day and is gone for 2 hours, and the books are not locked. You read them on your lunch hour with the peculiar intensity of a person trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense. Most of the women on the gallery are here for one of 3 reasons. The first is what the record call melancholia, which covers a range of presentations from Elizabeth Crane's quiet, faraway grief to the woman in cell 7 who has not spoken in 14 months, and whose previous keeper, a woman named Jennings, who left in March, used to sit with her for half an hour each evening because Jennings believed, against all institutional wisdom, that the silence needed company. Jennings is gone. Nobody sits with the woman in cell 7 anymore. The second category is what the records call raving or mania. The women who shout, who resist, who require restraint. You've seen it used twice in your 6 weeks. The chair, which is a heavy wooden chair with leather straps at the wrists and ankles and chest, used when a patient becomes dangerous to herself or others. You watched Bain strap a man into it 3 weeks ago, and you stood there with your hands at your sides and your face still, and afterwards you went to the sluice room and held your wrists under the cold water tap for a long time. Not for any practical reason, just because you needed to feel something cold and clean. The third category is the category you can't read without feeling something shift under your feet, something like the ground itself becoming uncertain. The records don't have a name for it. The physicians call it moral insanity, or hysteria, or ungovernable temperament. What they mean, when you read between the lines, is women who would not do what the men in their lives wanted them to do. Women who argued. Women who left the house without permission. Women who refused their husbands' beds. Women who expressed opinions that their families found inconvenient. Women who inherited money that someone else wanted. Women who were grieving too loudly or not loudly enough. Women who had been difficult, which is to say women who had been themselves, in a world that required them to be something smaller and quieter and more convenient. You don't say this to anyone. You are 19 years old and new here, and the correct thoughts in this institution are the thoughts of the institution. You know this. You are learning this the way you learn all the things in this place, through the slow, patient erosion of the things you thought you believed. But you think it. You can't stop thinking it. When you look at Sarah Dobbs gripping her door grate with those sharp, cataloguing eyes, you think it. By 9 o'clock, you're back on the men's gallery where you're supposed to be, and the morning routine is in full swing, and you're starting to understand that the women's gallery is not a detour from your real work. It is part of it. All of this is part of it. The men's gallery is longer than the women's by 4 cells and holds 16 patients. The head keeper here is a man named Vickers, James Vickers, who's been at Bethlem for 6 years and who you have decided is the second most competent person in the building after Mrs. Durwood. He has a particular way of moving through the gallery, a particular combination of alertness and deliberate calm that you've been trying to learn without being obvious about copying him. The thing about the men's gallery in the morning is the noise, not always shouting, not always anything that dramatic. But there is a quality to the sound of 16 men waking up in 16 small cells, 16 different minds in 16 different relationships with reality, that has a texture to it, a weight. It fills the gallery the way smoke fills a room, unevenly, collecting in corners, thinning in the middle. At the far end of the gallery against the eastern wall, where the grates look out over the hospital courtyard rather than more fields, is William Marsh. William Marsh is 28 years old from Southwark, and he is in what the records call the curable ward, which means the physicians believe there is some possibility that he will improve and eventually be discharged. This is a more optimistic categorization than most patients receive. Most patients at Bethlem are considered incurable, which means they will stay here until they die, or until a family member can be persuaded to take them back, which families rarely do, because taking a mad person back is not simple, and also because once a person has been in Bethlem, they have a quality of strangeness that doesn't wash off. William Marsh came to Bethlem after what his record describes as a sudden violent disturbance following business failures. His wife had him committed in February of this year. He's been here 9 months. He is, as far as you can tell, entirely coherent. This is something you have not raised with Vickers or Bain, and will not raise with anyone, because you are not the physician, and the determination of coherence is not your department, and you have been here 6 weeks, and cannot afford to lose this position. But every morning when you bring his bread and his broth, William Marsh says something, not raving, not nonsense, something observed, considered, specific. This morning he says, "You've been on the women's gallery." You stop. "How can you tell?" He looks at you with a slightly amused expression. "You smell different. The women's gallery uses more lavender in the sluice. Mrs. Durwood brought it in herself, I understand. Her own money. You hadn't known that. You didn't know Vickers does the men's sluice with plain water, and Mrs. Durwood pays for lavender out of her own 4 shillings a week." "Lawson's sick?" Marsh asks. "How do you know about Lawson?" He tilts his head slightly. "Footsteps. I know everyone's footsteps. Lawson favours his left foot since he twisted it in November. You have a different step, younger, less certain on the stone." You look at him for a moment. "Eat your bread," you say. He picks up the bread. He's watching you the way Sarah Dobbs watches things from behind her grate. The same quality of attention, the same sense of someone who has been given nothing to do except observe, and has therefore become exceptionally good at it. You lock the door and move on. 7 cells down the gallery, in the space where the morning light doesn't quite reach even at midsummer, is George Appleton. George Appleton is the reason Bain told you, in your first week, not to put your face close to the grates. He's 44 years old, and he has been in Bethlem for 11 years since 1752. when he was brought in from the street after attacking two people in the market at Spitalfields. The records describe what happened in the kind of clipped, professional language that drains the horror out of things, which you suspect is the point. He was violent on admission. He remains periodically violent. He has injured 3 keepers in 11 years, none of them seriously, except that one of them, a man named Portman who left in 1758, has what Vickers described to you as a particular sensitivity in his right hand that makes it difficult for him to hold things, which is injury enough. George Appleton does not speak. Not ever, as far as anyone knows. He has been here for 11 years and no one has heard his voice. He is chained. His right wrist specifically is attached to a chain bolted into the wall. The chain is long enough to allow him to move around his cell, to reach the corner with his chamber pot, to press himself against the door grate when he wants to look out. But he cannot reach the door itself with his free hand, because the door is on his left and the chain is on his right and the distance is calculated. Someone calculated that distance. Someone worked out the exact length of chain that would allow George Appleton to live in something approximating a cell without allowing him to do what the records suggest he would otherwise do. You try not to think too hard about the specific someone who worked that out. When you pass his grate, George Appleton is sitting on his bed, looking at the window. He often does this. Not at the view, because the window doesn't really offer a view, just a rectangle of grey sky. Just looking at the sky. Just watching whatever light there is move across the patch of visible heaven. You bring his bread. You slide it through the gap in the door grate, the one designed for this purpose, and you don't look at him directly while you're doing it, because Vickers told you eye contact with Appleton is variable in its effects and generally not advisable. He takes the bread. There is a moment, just a fraction of a moment, where his fingers and your fingers are on the bread at the same time, separated by the iron of the grate. A moment of almost contact. Then he pulls the bread through, and you move on. This is Bethlem in the morning. This is what you do 6 days a week, and sometimes 7 if someone is sick. And then at 10 o'clock, if it's a visitor day, the front gate opens. Tuesday is not a regular visitor day. Sundays are, and sometimes Mondays and Wednesdays. But Tuesday is the day the hospital's committee of governors meets, and after the committee meeting there is often a tour of the galleries for the governors themselves and any guests they have brought. And the governors bring guests frequently, because Bethlem is an impressive institution to show guests, and impressing guests is one of the things governors are for. Vickers tells you about the tour at 9:30. He tells you with the tone of someone telling you it will rain, which is the tone of a man who has accommodated himself to things he cannot change. Governor's tour, 11 o'clock, gallery needs to be tidy. Tidy means the straw swept to the sides of the cells. It means the chamber pots not visible from the grates. It means, as far as possible, the patients who shout quietly enough that the governor's conversation is not overwhelmed. This last one is not in your control. The patients don't know there's a governor's tour. The patients don't know what a governor is. The patients have their own interior calendars, their own rhythms, and a governor's tour at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday is not on any of those calendars. You sweep. You move pots. You work your way down the gallery while the morning light increases and Moorfields outside fills with carts and people going about their ordinary days. And somewhere below you in the steward's office, the governor's committee is settling into its quarterly meeting with, you imagine, a fire and decent chairs and the smell of coffee. The physician arrives at 11:15. His name is John Monroe. He's the physician to Bethlem and has been since 1751, when he succeeded his own father in the position, the family having been medical officers to this institution for generations. He is 41 years old, broad-shouldered, with a face that is not unkind but is not warm either. He is the sort of face that has learned to maintain a professional distance from everything it looks at. He comes twice a week on his scheduled visits, but he comes on governor tour days too, because the governor's questions about patients are medical questions, and someone needs to answer them. He walks the gallery with the governors behind him, and you and Vickers walk behind the governors, and the whole procession moves from cell to cell with the pace of a group of people who are looking at things, but who have scheduled themselves for a finite amount of looking. There are 6 governors today, 5 men and 1 woman, the woman being Lady Hartley, who is a benefactor of the hospital, and whose portrait hangs in the entrance hall, and whose money has contributed to the apothecary's dispensary, and, you're told, the new boiler in the laundry which was installed last year and which is the best piece of equipment in the building. Lady Hartley is perhaps 55. She walks the gallery with her hands clasped in front of her, looking at the cells with an expression you find difficult to categorize. Not horror, not indifference. Something more careful than either. Something that keeps its own counsel. At each cell, Dr. Monroe provides a brief account of the patient. Name, diagnosis, admission date, current condition. He speaks in a clear, measured professional voice, the same one you have heard him use when he talks to patients directly, which is not often. The governors listen and occasionally ask questions. The questions are mostly practical. What does this patient eat? Has this patient shown improvement? Is this patient violent? One of the governors, a man in an expensive wig who has not introduced himself to anyone below the rank of governor, and who you therefore don't know the name of, pauses at William Marsh's cell. Marsh is standing at his grate, looking out at the procession with that quality of amused, careful attention. This one looks well enough, the governor says. Mr. Marsh is currently stable, Dr. Monroe says. He had a significant episode on admission in February. We believe he is making progress. When might he be discharged? That depends on the progress of treatment. What treatment is he receiving? Dr. Monroe pauses for perhaps a second. He is receiving the standard course, bloodletting as appropriate, cold baths when indicated, rest and proper management. The governor nods as if this means something specific to him. It doesn't mean anything specific to you either. You've seen bloodletting once in your 6 weeks. A man in the men's gallery who was judged to be in a state of excessive excitement, and the physician who performed it, not Monroe, a junior who assists, did it with the brisk efficiency of a man performing a technical task that he believes in but does not enjoy. The man bled into a bowl and was quieter for several days afterward, whether that was the bloodletting or simply the exhaustion and the shock of the bloodletting you do not know. Nobody seems particularly interested in the question. Lady Hartley has stopped at the cell next to Marsh's. Inside, a young man, 18 maybe, the youngest patient on the gallery, admitted last month after what his record calls extreme religious enthusiasm manifesting in violent behaviour, is sitting with his back against the wall and his knees pulled up and is reading. Or rather, he is holding a book and looking at it. Whether the reading is happening is harder to say. His lips move sometimes. His finger traces across the page. Lady Hartley says, "He has a book." The patients are permitted books if their families provide them, Dr. Monroe says. Who provided his? A small pause. I believe the apothecary's boy brought it up, from the dispensary library. Lady Hartley is quiet for a moment. Then, is there money in the endowment for more books? Dr. Monroe says that is a question for the treasurer. The treasurer says he will look into it. They move on. You watch them go. Behind you, in his cell, William Marsh is watching the same thing. She's the only one who asked about the book, he says, through the grate quietly. Quiet, Mr. Marsh, you say. He is quiet. But you notice, too, the tour takes 40 minutes. 40 minutes for 6 governors and a physician to walk through a building containing 120 human beings in varying degrees of distress, to make notes in their ledgers, to nod at each other's observations, and to proceed to the committee room for further discussion. Then they are gone. Vickers comes up behind you as you watch the last of the governors disappear through the door to the stairwell. Right, he says. Back to it. Back to it. The gallery work resumes. The endless daily maintenance of 120 lives stripped of most of what makes a life. You are standing at the end of the gallery, looking out the window again. It is noon now. The light has changed, the winter sun at its low apex, throwing the shadow of the building across moorfields at an angle. People are crossing the open ground below. A woman, with a child on her hip, 2 men in working clothes, a cart of firewood, and then, coming through the hospital gate on the north side, a group of perhaps 8 people, 5 women, 3 men, dressed for a Tuesday afternoon, not governor's dress, not Sunday best, afternoon visiting dress, the women in good wool cloaks, the men in coats and hats, not governors, not family members who come separately and enter through a different gate. Visitors, public visitors, the penny visitors, the people who have come on a Tuesday afternoon in late November 1763 to walk through Bethlem Royal Hospital and look at the patients. Vickers is already moving toward the gallery entrance to meet them. This is the part of the day you've been dreading since the first time you saw it, in your second week, when you didn't know enough to understand what you were seeing. You stood in the corridor and watched strangers walk the gallery, and you thought, there must be a reason for this. There must be a practical, medical, institutional reason why the hospital allows this. You've been here 6 weeks and you have not found that reason. What you have found is that the penny income from visitors contributes meaningfully to the hospital's general fund, and that Bethlem has been allowing public access since at least the 17th century, and that there are physicians who argue, sincerely in published papers, that exposure to the sight of madness is morally instructive for the sane, a reminder of the fragility of reason and the importance of living correctly. You have also found that Hogarth used Bedlam as the setting for the final painting in A Rake's Progress, which hangs in a gallery across the city, and which people find very affecting, and which depicts a scene you have now seen with your own eyes on every visitor day. The group comes up the stairs. Vickers meets them at the gallery door. He runs them through the standard instructions. Do not approach the cells. Do not push objects through the grates. Do not provoke or agitate the patients. Do not make sudden, loud noises. The instructions are politely received. They're not always followed. You take your position at the far end of the gallery next to Appleton's cell, which is the position Vickers always assigns to you on visitor days, because Appleton's cell is the one that requires a keeper visible and present at all times. Not because Appleton will hurt the visitors, the chain prevents that, but because without a keeper at that end of the gallery, visitors have been known to push things through the grates, food, coins, sticks, on one recorded occasion, to see what would happen. You stand, the group walks. The first few cells produce the quieter reactions, murmured observations, the particular hushed, slightly stagey concern of people who want to appear affected, without actually being affected. You've learned to read this. The tilted head, the slightly pursed lips, the low voice saying, "Oh, the poor creature." It shifts by the middle of the gallery. Here is where 3 of the men's gallery patients are louder. Where one, a man called Peter Higgins, often shouts at visitors. Not words exactly, just sounds. Rhythmic bursts of noise that are difficult to characterize as either pain or anger, or simply the only way this particular mind has found to interact with the world. And where another man, whose name in the record is Francis Thornton, but who Vickers always calls the philosopher, sits at his grate and delivers speeches. Long, elaborate, fast-moving speeches about the nature of reality, the corruption of institutions, the hidden structures of the world. The philosopher is genuinely interesting to listen to if you have time and can follow the logic, which is real logic, pursued at speed through territory that eventually goes somewhere you can't follow. You have spent 2 evenings this week trying to follow it, sitting in the corridor during the quieter hours, listening. You get about 3/4 of the way before it goes somewhere you lose it. The visitors cluster around the philosopher. This is always the most popular cell. The philosopher has the quality of a performance without being one. He says these things regardless of audience to the empty gallery and to a crowd of strangers alike, and the visitors can convince themselves they are witnessing something authentic because they are. But what they are doing with that authentic thing, using it as Tuesday afternoon entertainment, is something else entirely. One of the women in the group, young, perhaps 20, with a good silk cap and the particular posture of someone doing their best to look unimpressed, pulls her companion toward the grate. She is laughing. Not cruel laughter, you think. Or rather, laughter that is not trying to be cruel, that doesn't understand its own cruelty. She pulls out a small notebook and writes something down. You watch her write in her notebook and you look at the philosopher through his grate, still talking, still building his elaborate architecture of thought, and you wonder what she's writing. What piece of this will she take home? What story will she tell at supper about the madmen she saw at Bedlam today? The philosopher looks at her, just for a second. Then he looks away and keeps talking. That fraction of a second, his eyes on her, and then his deliberate choice to withdraw his attention and continue his speech regardless. That is the thing that will stay with you. Not the notebook, not the laughter, the moment of acknowledgement, and then the choice to not acknowledge. As if he knows exactly what this is and has decided that his thoughts are more important than her presence. You think he might be right. The group reaches the end of the gallery. They reach your position outside Appleton's cell. You straighten. This is your job here. Stand between the visitors and the grate. Visible. Authoritative in the limited way a 19-year-old keeper with 6 weeks of experience is authoritative, which is to say mostly by height and expression. George Appleton is at the back of his cell, which is unusual. He is normally at the grate when visitors are in the gallery. You've watched him before, watching the visitors the way the visitors watch him, both parties engaged in the same activity with exactly opposite interpretations of what it means. Today he's at the back of his cell, sitting on his bed, not looking at the gallery at all. One of the male visitors, a broad man in a dark coat, takes a step toward the grate. This one dangerous. All the patients require careful management, you say. This is the phrase Vickers uses. It says nothing, which is the point. Chained up, is he? Sir, I'd ask you to remain at a respectful distance from the cells. The man looks at you. He is perhaps 40. He has the comfortable proprietorial look of a man who is used to being given what he asks for. I gave my penny, he says. Yes, sir, and you're welcome to view the gallery. I'd just ask, a penny gives me the right to see what I paid to see. You stand there for a moment. The gallery behind you is quiet except for the philosopher still going, his voice a steady undercurrent. You hear yourself say, "The hospital thanks you for your support, sir. The gallery is available for viewing from this position, and you do not move. You stay exactly where you are, between this man and George Appleton's cell, and you look at him with what you hope is the face of someone who will not move, because you will not." And eventually the man makes a small dismissive sound and turns to follow the rest of the group back toward the gallery door. Vickers appears at your shoulder a moment later. "Good," he says. "That's all." You exhale. Behind you, in his cell, George Appleton has moved. He's at the back window now, the small barred square of grey sky. His hand is up, fingers spread against the glass. Not reaching, just touching. The way a person touches something cold that they can feel through the glass but cannot properly hold. You watch him for a moment. Then you turn back to the gallery. The visitors are leaving. They go in their little group, their silk capes and their good coats, back down the stairs and through the reception hall, and out through the gate into Moorfields, where the ordinary world continues in its ordinary way. You can see them from the window as they cross the open ground, clustered, talking to each other, one of the women still with her notebook out, the conversation already becoming the story they'll tell about today. The gate closes behind them. The gallery settles back into its own rhythms. You lean against the window wall and close your eyes for just a second. The cold of the glass on the back of your hand, the sound of the philosopher still talking to his empty cell, the rhythmic murmur from further down. Margaret Fielding's scratching. This is Bethlem at noon. You've been here 6 hours. You have 8 more to go. The afternoon is different from the morning in the way that all institutional afternoons are different. The tasks are the same, but the light has changed, and something in the changed light makes everything feel like a continuation rather than a beginning. You are continuing rather than beginning, which is a small distinction but a real one. The afternoon tasks on the gallery are the midday round, which is bread and something hot from the kitchen if the kitchen has produced something hot, and checking the cells, which means opening the doors with Vickers present and checking for anything that needs immediate attention. Fresh straw, a person who needs medical attention. Someone who has got into a state of distress severe enough to require the physician's notice. Most afternoons the physician's notice is not required. Most afternoons the distress that exists in these cells exists at a level that is its own normal, that the institution has calibrated itself around. You knock before you open each door. This is your own practice. Vickers doesn't require it, but you started doing it in your first week and now you can't stop. It feels like the minimum. It probably doesn't matter to anyone. You knock anyway. The midday round takes you to cell 9 on the men's gallery, which is occupied by a man whose record lists him as Arthur Leeds, 57, admitted 6 years ago. Diagnosis: melancholic despondency. When you open the door, the cell is empty. Not empty in the way a cell is empty after someone has gone. Empty in the physical sense of the word. The bed is there. The chamber pot is there. Arthur Leeds is not. You stand in the doorway for what is probably 4 seconds but feels longer, while your brain runs through its inventory and finds nothing useful. Then Vickers is at your shoulder. "Sash," he says. You look up. The window. The sash is up. Someone leads, has pushed it up on its counterweights, and the gap is maybe 14 inches, maybe 15. Small, very small. small enough that a man who is 57 and probably not large, you're already picturing him slight. The way the gallery makes people slight might, with considerable effort and discomfort, have gone through it. Vickers is already moving. The drop from the upper gallery window to the courtyard below is approximately 15 feet. You know this because Vickers tells you as he runs for the stairs, and you run behind him, and you are thinking about 15 feet in a way that you will later recognize as shock, which is a particular kind of thinking where your mind is very clear and very fast and is doing everything except addressing the thing that is actually happening. The courtyard is empty when you get there, both of you running out the side door into the grey afternoon. The space is perhaps 40 feet wide, gravel over stone, bordered by the hospital building on 3 sides and the garden wall on the 4th. Arthur Leeds is not in the courtyard. But there are marks in the gravel, the disturbed marks of something landing hard, and leading from those marks toward the garden wall, footprints. Vickers goes to the wall. You go with him. The wall is maybe 8 feet high, old brick, and at the base of the wall nearest to the footprints there is, you now see, a barrel. An old wooden barrel that came from somewhere. The kitchen yard, you think. Someone moved it. Positioned against the wall in a way that would let a person get purchase. Climb. Arthur Leeds, 57 years old, 6 years in Bethlem, melancholic despondency, has climbed out of his window and across a courtyard and up a barrel and over the garden wall. Vickers stands looking at the wall for a moment. His face is doing the thing experienced people's faces do, which is processing quickly on the inside while maintaining a surface that gives nothing away. Then he says, "Go round the front. I'll go through the garden. You go round the front." Moorfields, in the middle of a November afternoon, is doing what Moorfields does, moving steadily and without particular regard for anything happening at its edges. The cattle market runs along the southern end, and there is the usual noise and smell of that. You can hear it from where you are, the lowing, the carters. North of you the streets thin out into areas that are still developing, new buildings going up on ground that 10 years ago was more open. Arthur Leeds is standing about 40 feet from the hospital gate. He is standing in the middle of Moorfields, not moving, looking north. He's wearing his indoor clothes, the rough hospital linen, no coat, no hat, and the air is cold enough that his breath makes small clouds. He is very still. You walk toward him, not running, walking. He hears you when you're about 10 feet away. He turns, he looks at you. His face is, you search for the word, not afraid, not defiant. Something more like the expression a person wears when they've been caught doing something they knew they would be caught doing, and the being caught is almost a relief. "Mr. Leeds," you say. He looks at you. Then he looks back north. "I was just looking," he says. His voice is quieter than you expected, and clearer. "I wanted to see the sky from somewhere that wasn't a window." You stand there for a second. The sky in question is a typical November sky, grey-white, the sort of sky that suggests it has given up on being any particular kind of sky and is simply existing as a general overhead presence. But you can see why it would look different from out here, where there is no iron bar across it, where it goes all the way to the edges of your vision, without anything cutting it. "Come on then," you say. "It's cold." He looks at you for a moment longer. Then he nods. He falls into step beside you, and you walk back to the gate, and Vickers is coming around the garden path, and his face does several things at once when he sees you with Leeds already walking back in, and then settles into the version of itself that says, "Fine, then." The walk back up the gallery stairs is done in silence. Leeds's bare feet on the stone are very quiet. He climbs without drama. At his cell door, you stop. He goes in. You close the door. You do not immediately lock it. He doesn't notice. Or he notices and doesn't say anything. You stand in the gallery for a moment with your hand on the lock. Then you lock it. Then you go to find Vickers because you have to report this. Because the window will need to be fixed. Because the barrel will need to be moved. Because that's what happens after something like this. The administrative consequence of a 57-year-old man who wanted to see the sky from somewhere that wasn't a window. Vickers writes it in the incident book. He writes it in the same way everything is written in this building, brisk and factual. Patient Leeds, cell 9, absent from cell at midday round. Found in Moorfields, returned without incident. Window sash to be nailed, barrel in courtyard to be removed. He does not write, he wanted to see the sky. That part doesn't go in the book. You eat supper at 4 o'clock in the keeper's room on the ground floor. The food is bread and a piece of salt meat that has been boiled into a kind of submission and a cup of small beer. You eat it without tasting it, sitting across from Ellis, who's just come on for the evening shift and is fresh and unhelpful in the way of people who are just starting their day when you're finishing yours. Heard about Leeds, Ellis says. Word travels in this building. There are only so many people in it, and the walls are old and don't hold sounds the way newer walls do. He went out through the window, you say. Third time someone's done that. Lawson's fault, really. He's been lax about the window checks. Ellis tears a piece of bread. Think they'll use the chair on him? You think about Arthur Leeds on Moorfields, looking north at the grey sky, breathing cold air. He came back without any trouble, you say. That's not how it works. Ellis shrugs. Escape attempt is an escape attempt. Bain will document it. The physician will review. Might be moved to a more secure cell. More secure, which in the language of this place means less. Less light. Less room. Less sky. You push your plate back. Is Bain in? Back office. Bain is in the back office at his desk with the incident book in front of him and an expression of settled resignation. He looks up when you come in. Hadley. Mr. Bain, about Leeds. Sit down, you sit. You. Bain looks at you for a moment with the expression of a man who's been managing difficult situations for 27 years and has developed a particular tolerance for people who are about to say something he has already heard. He's not a danger, you say. He came back without any difficulty. He just wanted... What he wanted isn't the category that matters here, Bain says. Not unkindly. Definitely not unkindly. This is the thing about Bain that makes him harder to dismiss than you'd like. He is not cruel. He is not stupid. He is a man who has made his accommodation with the institution he serves and who believes that accommodation is the only way to function within it. What matters is that a patient was outside this building without authorization. That creates liability for the hospital. It creates liability for us. If he'd been hurt in Moorfields, he was standing still. He's 57 years old in his indoor clothes in November, standing still in Moorfields long enough and he'd be dead of cold. Bain closes the incident book. I'll review with the physician. It's possible nothing additional will be recommended, but I need to document it accurately. And if the physician recommends the secure wing? Bain looks at you, that long measuring look again. Then that's the physician's call. You stand up. You want to say something else. You don't know what. The something else doesn't have words yet, or the words it has are too large for this room, too large for the incident book and the medical recommendation and the liability of the hospital. You go back upstairs. The gallery at 5 o'clock in the afternoon in late November is dark. The windows on the north side of the building face Moorfields, which has its own thin November light until about 3, and then it doesn't. You carry a lamp, 2 lamps, on a busy day, one at each end of the gallery, and the cells themselves have no light except what comes in through the small windows, which at 5 o'clock is nothing. You have been thinking about light since your first week here, about what it means to have no control over when you see it. The patient's days are regulated by bells, by meals, by the institutional rhythm, which is itself regulated by the sun, in a way that is entirely abstract to anyone who cannot see the sun. You're up when you are told to be up. You eat when you are told to eat. You sleep when the institution decides sleep happens. The patients on the gallery have been told to be awake since 7 this morning. They will be told to sleep at 9 tonight. 14 hours of whatever the inside of their cells contains. At 5 o'clock you make the late afternoon round. The lamp casts a circle of orange warmth that travels with you down the gallery and makes the cells, briefly slightly less cold-looking. At William Marsh's cell you stop. He is reading. There is enough light left for that, just barely, and he is tilted toward the window, the book angled to catch the last of it. When he hears your footsteps stop, he looks up. "What was the incident this afternoon?" he asks. You're still surprised sometimes by how much he knows. "Mr. Leeds left the building for a short time," you say, carefully, "and came back. It's not a question." "Yes." Marsh is quiet for a moment. He looks down at his book. "He told me once." He stops, looks up. "Through the grates. We can talk through the grates at night sometimes if it's quiet. He told me he used to walk on Hampstead Heath on Sunday mornings. He had a dog before all this. He said the dog always knew when they were close to the top of the hill because it would start pulling at the lead. You stand there with your lamp. Did he say what the view was like?" "He said you could see all the way to the river, both directions." Marsh looks back at his book. "Go do your rounds, Mr. Hadley. You've got another 12 cells before the end of the gallery." You go. In cell 11, Thomas Holt, 31, admitted 8 months ago after what the record calls a sudden and extreme perturbation, is sitting on his bed and appears to be praying. His lips move. His hands are flat on his knees. His eyes are closed. You watch him through the grate for a moment. Then you move on. In cell 12, the last cell before the locked door to the women's gallery, is a man you have not yet approached directly. His name in the record is James Crow, and he arrived 3 weeks ago and has been in an acute state since admission. Loud, resistant, refusing food for the first week, requiring 2 keepers at the door on 3 occasions. He's in his 20s. The record gives very little context. His family brought him in and left quickly and have not returned. He is quiet now. He's been quieter for about 10 days, which Vickers says may mean the acute phase is passing or may mean something else. And the something else that Vickers doesn't specify is a thing you've noticed yourself. Sometimes when the loud ones get quiet, they get quiet in a way that is worse than the noise. You stop at his grate. Inside, the cell is very dark. The window faces east, and by 5 in the afternoon there is nothing coming through it. You lift your lamp. James Crow is sitting on the floor, not the bed. The floor, against the back wall, his knees up, his back straight, looking at you with a kind of steady, contained look of a person who has decided to stop spending their energy on things that don't work and is now conserving everything they have. "Good evening," you say. The phrase comes out before you've thought about it. He looks at you. "Are you hungry?" A pause, something moving in his face. Then he says, very quietly, "Yes." You say, "I'll bring something." You go to the kitchen and you get bread, extra bread, saved from the supper distribution, and you come back to cell 12 and you slide it through the grate, and James Crow takes it and eats it without taking his eyes off you. You stand there while he eats. It is an odd thing to do. It is not part of the routine. But it is so clear that eating without being watched is not something he can quite manage yet, that the watching is some part of what makes this function, that you stay until the bread is gone. Then he says, "Thank you." You say, "Good night, Mr. Crow," and you go on to finish the round. At 8 o'clock, the evening shift transition happens. Cook takes over from Vickers for the night. You're supposed to be off, your shift theoretically ending at 7, except that you stayed for the evening round because you were already there, and Vickers looked tired and the logic of staying was stronger than the logic of going. You eat in the keeper's room again, more bread, small beer. The kitchen at this hour is winding down, the fire banked, the smell of the day's cooking cooling into a kind of ghost smell that hangs in the rafters. You're sitting at the long table alone when Mrs. Durwood comes in. She doesn't usually come into the keeper's room. There is a separate room for the female keepers, smaller, further down the passage. But she comes in, sits down at the other end of the table, pours herself a cup of beer from the jug, and says nothing for a long moment. You say nothing either. You've learned that Mrs. Durwood's silences have contents. "Sarah Dobbs asked about you today," she says eventually. You look up. "She asked whether you were new, or whether you'd always been on the men's gallery and she hadn't seen you." Mrs. Durwood takes a sip of her beer. "I told her you'd been covering for Lawson." "What did she say?" "She said you were the one who stopped Mr. Griswold from going close to the grate this morning. That was the governor's tour. The man in the expensive wig." "He was standing too close, you say." She noticed. Mrs. Durwood looks at you with that measuring look that's different from Bain's measuring look. Less weighing, more taking inventory. She asks questions, that one. Keeps track. "Is that—" You're not sure how to ask this. "Is that considered a symptom?" Something crosses Mrs. Durwood's face that might be, in another context, a smile. Her husband said she had an unnatural fixation on matters beyond her station, she says. Her physician agreed. Her minister agreed. Her mother wrote a letter to the steward saying her daughter had always been headstrong and required firm management. A pause. "What do you think?" you ask. You're aware as you ask it that this is not the kind of question you're supposed to ask in this building. The determination of what is and isn't a symptom is not your department. The determination of what is and isn't madness belongs to the physician and the physician's licensing body and the physician's father who preceded him in the position and whose portrait also hangs in the entrance hall. Mrs. Durwood looks at her cup. "I think," she says carefully, "that my job is to look after the women on my gallery and do it properly, the same as yours is to look after the men on yours." That's not an answer. "No," she says, "it's not." She finishes her beer and stands up. She's almost to the door when she stops. "The lavender in the sluice," she says, not turning around. "I've been buying it myself for 4 years. Nobody asked me to. Nobody told me not to. Some days it makes a difference and some days it doesn't." Then she's gone. You sit at the long table for a while after she leaves, with your cup of small beer and the fading smell of the kitchen and the sounds of the building above you settling into its night rhythms. Bedlam at night. The visitors are gone. The governors are long gone. The physician has gone home to his house in Red Lion Square, where he has a library and a good fire and a wife and children and all the ordinary furniture of an ordinary life. What's left is the patients and the keepers, cook on the men's gallery, heavy-footed and practised, making his rounds with the efficiency of a man who has done this long enough not to think about it. 2 women keepers on the women's gallery. You don't know them as well. They work shifts you don't overlap with often. And the patients, who don't stop at night, who don't necessarily sleep when the institution tells them to, who carry their particular versions of reality into the darkness of their cells and continue there whatever they were doing during the day because the mind doesn't have an off switch, doesn't have a shift change, doesn't stop at 9 o'clock because that's when the candles go out. You've been told by Ellis, who has been here 8 months and therefore knows things you don't, that the night sounds in Bethlem take getting used to, that in your first weeks you hear them as distress, every sound as someone in pain, and then gradually you recalibrate, not because the sounds stop being what they are, but because your nervous system reaches some kind of accommodation. You're still in the first week stage. You hear the sounds as what they are. From the direction of the men's gallery, something percussive. A patient knocking on his cell wall in a pattern. Knock, pause. Knock, knock, pause. Knock, pause. It doesn't resolve into anything you can decode. It is just a pattern, consistent and deliberate. The sound of someone marking time in a room where there is otherwise no way to mark it. From outside, the city. London at night, which is quieter than London in the day, but never silent. Carts still moving somewhere. A shout distant softened from Moorfield's dogs. And somewhere further, the bells. Not just one church. Never just one church in this part of London. The bells of St. Giles Cripplegate and St. Luke's and St. Botolph's, and further away, if the wind is right, the great bells of St. Paul's marking the quarter hours in their enormous authoritative voice that you can hear through the walls of the building and through the cold November air, and all the way into your chest if you stand still enough to feel it. 9:15. 15 minutes before the end of the official waking hours. You get up from the table, you put on your coat and you go upstairs. Not to do anything. Just to walk the gallery once, in the quiet, before you go to your cot. The lamp you carry is the only light in the corridor. The cells are dark. At the windows, the faint greyish light of a London night, never truly black. Too many fires and lanterns for that, makes thin rectangles. You walk slowly. At the philosopher's cell, the voice is still going. Quieter now. More interior, the same logic pursued at a lower frequency. You stop for a moment and listen. He's talking about the nature of categories, about how the distinction between one kind of thing and another is created by those who benefit from the distinction, which is either madness or something you read in a pamphlet once and found difficult to argue with. At William Marsh's cell, silence. He is probably asleep, or lying in the dark thinking about Hampstead Heath, and a dog pulling at its lead. At George Appleton's cell, you stop. The silence here is of a different quality from the philosopher's silence or Marsh's silence. It has weight, the particular weight of a person who has stopped engaging with the world and whom the world has responded to by building a wall around. You hold your lamp up. Through the grate, in the dim circle of its light, you can see the outline of Appleton in his bed, turned toward the wall. The chain is slack, running from his wrist to the bolting in the stone, just the right length, just the measured length. You stand there for a moment. 11 years. 11 years in this room. You're 19 years old, which means George Appleton has been in this room for longer than you have been alive. You were 8 years old. No, you were born after he came in. He was here before you existed. When you were learning to walk on the kitchen floor in Worcester, George Appleton was in this room. And the sun still rises, the bells still ring, the visitors come and go, and he is still here, in this room, and the room has not changed. And outside on Moorfields the cattle market runs, and the city builds new buildings and burns old ones down, and ships come up the Thames from every corner of the world. And George Appleton is in this room with his chain and his small window and his 11 years. You lower the lamp. You move on to the end of the gallery. You stand at the last window for a moment. Moorfields is dark now mostly. The carts and the cattle and the morning pedestrians all gone. A light or two far off from houses at the edge of the open space. The hospital behind you breathes. That is the word that comes to you, breathes, though what it breathes is not clean. You think, I have been here 6 weeks. You think, I will go home to Worcester at Christmas if I can get 2 days. You think, I will write to my mother this week. You think, Arthur Leeds wanted to see the sky. You think, Sarah Dobbs keeps track. You think, Mrs. Durwood buys lavender with her own money. You go to bed. The attic room is cold. Cook is somewhere on the gallery. Ellis is in the cot by the window, already asleep, one arm flung out, breathing with the uncomplicated ease of a young man who's been here 8 months and has therefore made his accommodation. You lie on your cot in your clothes because it is too cold to undress, and you pull the blanket up and you look at the ceiling. Tomorrow is Wednesday, Visitor Day. The thought settles into you like a stone into water. Wednesday is Visitor Day, and you will stand at the end of the men's gallery between the visitors and George Appleton's cell, and you will use the phrase all patients require careful management when someone asks if he's dangerous, and you will watch women in silk caps write in notebooks, and you will do the chamber pots and the bread and the midday round, and somewhere in the middle of it, William Marsh will say something that makes you think, and somewhere at the end of it, you will stand at the window and look out at Moorfields for 30 seconds. That is your day tomorrow. You close your eyes. The city is very large out there in the dark. 500,000 people in their beds and their taverns and their gin shops, going about the business of being alive in London in 1763. Most of them will never set foot in this building. Most of them think of it, when they think of it at all, as a landmark, a curiosity, the place that gives the word for chaos. Some of them will come on Sunday, but right now, tonight, it is just a building, full of people trying to get through the night. You're asleep before the bells strike 9. In the morning the smell wakes you first, as always. Wednesday begins the same way Tuesday began, the same bells, the same cold, the same sequence of tasks assembled in the same order by the institutional logic that has been running this place for longer than you or Bain or anyone here has been alive. But Wednesday is different from Tuesday in one specific way. Wednesday is a visitor day, which means that by 10 o'clock there will be people on the gallery, and by 12 o'clock there will be more of them. And some of them will have notebooks, and some of them will have children, and some of them will say things that you will have to decide how to respond to in the moment, with no script and no authority and no support beyond the physical fact of your own presence. And this particular Wednesday, as you're learning the morning's assignment from Vickers at the gallery door, is different from other Wednesdays in a way that Vickers tells you about, with the particular flatness of tone he reserves for things that require you to pay careful attention. The Grosvenor party, he says, arriving at 11. You have heard this name, or rather you have heard the name attached to a category of visitor that is different from the penny visitors, different from the governors, something in between. The arranged private tours for people of means who want a more considered experience than the public gallery affords. The Grosvenor party is a group of 12 people, friends of a hospital benefactor it turns out, a man who sits on the committee of one of the charitable societies that provides some portion of Bethlem's income. The kind of people for whom a penny gallery visit is not quite right, not quite the appropriate context, but who have a genuine interest. Genuine, this is not the doubt in your voice, this is what Vickers says, in the work of the institution and wish to understand it properly. What does that mean, you ask? It means, Vickers says, that they want to talk to the physician, and they want to walk the gallery, and they want to understand what we do here. What do we do here? Vickers looks at you for a moment. We manage patients, he says. Now go do the morning round. The morning round takes you to cell 9. Arthur Leeds, who slept well according to the night book. Cook records sleep quality because Bain requires it, and who looks this morning about the same as he looked yesterday before he went through the window. Quiet, settled, looking at the small piece of sky in his window. You bring his bread. You slide it through the grate. He takes it without speaking, and then, after a moment, I heard they're nailing the sash. Yes, you say. He looks at the bread in his hands. Was it very much trouble? You think about what to say. It didn't need to be, Mr. Leeds, you say. You came back. He looks at you then. Something in his face that you can't quite read but is not nothing. I always would, he says. I didn't want to escape. I wanted to see. You look at him for a moment. Then, the morning round, you go. The Grosvenor party arrives at 11:15, slightly late, in 2 carriages that you see from the gallery window as they pull up to the hospital gate. 12 people descending onto the gravel, the women in day dresses with fur-trimmed cloaks, the men in good wool coats, 2 or 3 young people who might be in their early 20s, one older woman, perhaps 65, who moves very slowly and carries a stick, but who moves with the absolute certainty of someone who has never had to hurry. This is Lady Grosvenor herself, you learn later, who has supported this hospital for 30 years and who knows Bethlem better, in some respects, than anyone currently employed here, who was on the committee when the north wing was repaired in 1748, who paid for the garden wall you can see from the men's gallery. Dr. Munro meets them in the entrance hall. You're not there for this. You're on the gallery, which is where Vickers has positioned you, with instructions that are slightly different from the standard visitor instructions, less passive. These people want to understand the work, Vickers says, so when they ask you something, you can actually answer. You're still thinking about this when the party comes up the stairs. They're quieter than the penny visitors. They come into the gallery and they stop and they look, and the first thing that the oldest woman, Lady Grosvenor, says is, "It's cold up here." It is. The gallery is always cold. The heating situation in the upper gallery is exactly what you'd expect from a building of this age and this funding level, which is to say there is a fireplace at each end, and the fireplaces are lit in the morning and do something to the temperature close to them, and almost nothing to the temperature in the middle of the gallery. Yes, my lady, Dr. Munro says. We provide additional blankets during the winter months. She looks at him. It is a specific kind of look, the look of someone who's been told things for decades and has become very good at knowing the difference between a thing that is true and a thing that is technically accurate. How many blankets? The standard provision is 1 per patient, with supplementary supply as required. And who determines when the supplementary supply is required? The keeping staff make that determination in consultation with myself. Lady Grosvenor looks down the gallery. Which one of you makes that determination? This is addressed to Vickers and to you, both of you standing at respectful keeper distance from the group. Vickers says, "Both of us share the responsibility, my lady. Mr. Vickers for the daily checks, and I myself for cases requiring medical judgment." She looks at you, not Vickers, you. "And you? What's your name?" "Hadley, my lady. Thomas Hadley. I've been here 6 weeks." She looks at you with those sharp old eyes for a moment, long enough that you feel the weight of it. "6 weeks," she says. "What have you learned?" The question lands in the air of the gallery and stays there. Nobody moves. The rest of the party is looking at you. Dr. Munro's face is carefully neutral. Vickers is very still. You think about what you've learned. You think about Arthur Leeds on Moorfields, looking north. You think about Margaret Fielding's nail. You think about Mrs. Durwood's lavender, bought with her own money, 4 years. You think about James Crow eating bread with his eyes on yours. You think about what you're supposed to say, which is something institutional and general and forward-facing. You say, "I've learned that the days are long for everyone here, my lady, and that small things matter more than I expected." Lady Grosvenor looks at you for another moment. Then she says, which is not agreement and not disagreement, just a sound that suggests she has received the information and will evaluate it. She moves down the gallery. The party follows. At the philosopher's cell, Dr. Munro gives a brief account. Name, diagnosis, admission date, current condition. The philosopher is mid-speech, as always, addressing the air in front of him with the concentration of a lecturer at a university. The party listens. One of the younger men, perhaps 23, in a good grey coat, is leaning forward slightly, visibly interested. "What is he saying?" this young man asks. "He argues," Dr. Munro begins, "that I'd like to hear him say it himself." A small pause. Dr. Munro looks at the cell, at the philosopher. Then he says carefully, "The patient's discourse tends to become agitated when engaged directly. I'll be careful." The young man steps toward the grate. "Good morning," he says. "I'm sorry to interrupt. Could you tell me what you were discussing?" The philosopher stops mid-sentence. He looks at the young man. This is, you realise, the first time you've seen a visitor actually address him as if he were a person rather than a thing to be observed. The philosopher says, "I was discussing the function of the category, the way in which naming a thing creates the thing, the way in which calling a man mad creates the madness that justifies the calling." A very complete silence. The young man looks back at Dr. Munro. Dr. Munro clears his throat. The patient's discourse frequently touches on themes of identity and classification, that seemed quite coherent to me, the young man says. The silence this time has a different quality. The rest of the party is looking at Dr. Munro. Lady Grosvenor is looking at the philosopher. The condition, Dr. Munro says, can present with periods of apparent lucidity. This is not uncommon in certain forms of apparent lucidity, the philosopher says from behind his grate, in a tone of deep satisfaction. There it is. You see how the category works. Lucidity cannot be real because the patient is, by definition, not lucid. If the patient speaks sense, it must be apparent sense. If the patient argues coherently, the coherence must be a symptom. The young man looks back through the grate. The philosopher looks at him with something you've never seen on his face before. Not the usual performance, not the usual audience regardless intensity. Something more direct, more personal. "You heard what I said," the philosopher says, "before. What was I discussing?" Categories, the young man says. The function of naming. Yes, what did you think? I thought you were right, the young man says, and then, quickly, with a small backwards glance, I should. You should, the philosopher says. Yes, you should. And he looks away from the grate, back to his middle distance, and resumes his speech as if the exchange never happened. The party moves on. You walk behind them in your keeper position, and you feel something happening in your chest that is not a comfortable feeling. That is the particular discomfort of watching a thing you cannot stop and are not sure how to name. At William Marsh's cell, the young man in the grey coat pauses again. Marsh is reading. He looks up. He and the young man look at each other through the grate for a moment with a particular recognition of two people who are about the same age and who belong to very different versions of the same world. The young man says, "What are you reading?" Marsh shows the spine. "Is it good?" "The argument is interesting," Marsh says. "The style is less." The young man almost smiles. Then he moves on. Marsh looks at you after they've passed. Just looks. You look back. You move on. Lady Grosvenor is standing at the end of the gallery, at the last window, the one you stand at yourself in the evenings. She's looking out at Moorfields, the open space in the November afternoon, the cattle market, the carters, the ordinary life of a city going about its ordinary business. You stand beside her at the correct keeper distance. She says, without looking at you, "When I first came here, 1732 or thereabouts, there were men chained to walls in the ground floor rooms, chained to the walls by their necks in some cases. There were no separate cells, just a large room, all the patients together, no separation of the violent from the not violent, the men from the women, no separation at all. You say nothing. She's not asking you a question. It's better now, she says. It is genuinely better. I want you to know I believe that because it matters to say it. Progress is real. Improvement is real. But," she pauses, looks out at Moorfields, "but better than chains around the neck is not the same as good. And I sometimes worry that we congratulate ourselves on the distance we've travelled and forget to look at where we still are." She turns from the window, looks at you with those sharp, assessing eyes. "You said small things matter. What did you mean?" You consider. "There's a woman who keeps a nail, you say, hidden in a straw. She uses it to mark the days on her cell wall. Nobody has found it because the sound is very quiet. She's been marking the days for 6 months. Lady Grosvenor is very still. And a man who..." You stop. You think about Arthur Leeds. You think about what happened yesterday and what is in the incident book and what you are and are not supposed to discuss with a visitor. A man who wanted to see the sky from somewhere that wasn't a window. A long pause. "Did he?" she says. "Briefly." She looks at you for a moment longer. Then she turns back to the gallery, where Dr. Monroe is explaining something to the party. Something about treatment protocols and the phases of management and the hospital's record on patient outcomes, which is spoken in the language of institutions that makes everything sound orderly and evidenced. "The nail," Lady Grosvenor says. "Is she managing?" "She's marking the days, you say." "That's what I know." Lady Grosvenor nods, once, slowly, as if this answer is the only one that would have satisfied her. She walks back to rejoin the party. You stand at the window for your 30 seconds. The party leaves at 12:30. The carriages come back around to the gate, and the 12 people get into them in the grey November afternoon, and the carriages move off into the city. The young man in the grey coat is the last to get in. He looks back at the building before he does. Just looks. Then the carriage door closes and they're gone, Vickers appears beside you. How'd it go? Fine, you say. The philosopher behaved himself? He said what he always says. Vickers nods. Monroe will have something to say about the young gentleman in the grate. He was polite. He was, Vickers agrees. Doesn't matter. Monroe doesn't like visitors engaging directly. Blurs things. You think about what things get blurred, then you go to do the afternoon round. By 3 o'clock the gallery is in its afternoon rhythm and you're at the end of it, near the women's gallery door, and you can hear through the locked door the sounds of the women's afternoon, which are different from the men's in a way you're still trying to articulate. Quieter in some ways, more interior, less of the philosopher's out-directed energy, more of the other kind, the turned inward sound of people who've been told for a very long time that their interior is the problem, and have in some cases started to believe it. You think about Sarah Dobbs's notebook. You think, she doesn't have a notebook. She has her cell wall probably, like Margaret Fielding. She has her sharp, data-gathering eyes. You go back to the men's gallery. At 4 o'clock you are summoned to the physician's consulting room. This has not happened before. You stand outside the door for a moment, the way you always stand before you knock, which is the habit you've developed for cell doors and which applies apparently to any door now. You knock. You go in. Dr. Monroe is at his desk. His room is the warmest in the building by a significant margin. The fireplace properly banked, a small lamp on the desk, books on the shelves that go from floor to ceiling on 2 walls. It smells of leather and wood smoke and something medicinal underneath. He looks up from whatever he's writing. He looks at you with a professionally neutral expression. Hadley, sir, sit down. You sit in the chair across from his desk, the chair that is usually occupied by family members coming to discuss a patient, or governors with questions, or you realise you don't actually know who else sits in this chair, the world from which the patients have come, the ordinary people who had to make an impossible decision and ended up on this side of the desk. Lady Grosvenor spoke to me before she left, Dr. Monroe says. You wait. She said you told her about a patient marking the days on her cell wall with a hidden nail. Yes, sir. Which patient? Margaret Fielding, cell 3, women's gallery. He makes a note. You watch him make it and you wonder what the note says, and specifically whether the note is going to result in a search of Margaret Fielding's cell and the removal of her nail. She also mentioned, he pauses, looks at you over his pen, a patient who left the building to see the sky. Mr. Leeds, yesterday afternoon, which is already in the incident book. Yes, sir. Lady Grosvenor found both anecdotes instructive, Dr. Monroe says. The word instructive lands with a particular weight that suggests it is doing more work than it appears. She has indicated that she will be making an additional contribution to the hospital's endowment to be directed toward patient well-being improvements. You say nothing. She mentioned you specifically, Dr. Monroe says, by name. Another pause. She has a long memory, he says, not quite to you, not quite to himself. She was on the committee when they were chaining men by the neck, and she remembers all of it, and she has very particular ideas about the direction of improvement. He looks at you properly now, the professionally neutral expression doing something slightly different from what it usually does. You've been here 6 weeks. Yes, sir. In 6 weeks you have covered 3 different gallery assignments, managed a patient who left the building and returned him without incident, and apparently had a conversation with Lady Grosvenor that produced a charitable donation. I just answered her question, sir. He looks at his note. The nail, did you know about it before today? For about a week, sir. I heard the sound. I knew what it was. Why didn't you report it? The question sits in the warm, book-lined room. You say, "She wasn't hurting anyone, sir. She was marking the days. I didn't know." You stop. Start again. I wasn't sure what reporting it would accomplish. Dr. Monroe is very still. What it would accomplish, he says, is the proper management of the institution, which is not your department. Yes, sir. If a patient has a hidden implement, that implement is a potential danger to herself, to the staff, to other patients. Yes, sir. The fact that she is currently using it to mark a wall does not mean she will always use it to mark a wall. Yes, sir. He looks at you for a long moment, the kind of long moment that is an evaluation, and where you have no idea what the outcome will be, and where the outcome matters considerably. Then he says, "The nail should be removed, but do it carefully, with Mrs. Durwood present. Explain to Mrs. Fielding that it's for her safety, which it is." He turns back to his papers. "That will be all, Hadley." You stand up. "Sir," you say, "may I ask, will there be a search of the cell? Mrs. Durwood will handle it appropriately." "Yes, sir." A pause. "Will Mrs. Fielding be moved?" He looks up. "Is there a reason she should be?" "No, sir, No, sir." He looks at you for another moment. Then, "Go back to the gallery." You go back to the gallery. You find Mrs. Durwood at the locked door and you tell her what Dr. Monroe said. She listens with her arms folded and her face doing the thing it does, which is taking everything in and giving nothing away. Then she says, "Tonight, after supper, I'll tell her first." Tell her that it needs to come out, that it's not. She stops, looks at the floor for a moment. She'll give it up herself if you ask her the right way. You look at Mrs. Durwood. 4 years, she says, and I've never taken anything from a patient without telling them first. Not if it can be helped. Then she turns and goes back through the door to the women's gallery. You stand in the corridor for a moment. Then you go and do the rest of the afternoon. At 7:30, in the corridor outside cell 3 of the women's gallery, you stand with your back to the wall while Mrs. Durwood speaks to Margaret Fielding through the closed door. You're not in the cell. You're not even looking. You are just there, because Mrs. Durwood wanted a witness, or wanted company, or wanted something that having another person present provides, and you are the something. You cannot hear what is said. The door is heavy and the corridor carries sound poorly. You can hear the tone of it, Mrs. Durwood's voice steady and low, and then after a moment, a response, also low. You have never heard Margaret Fielding speak before. Her record says she speaks rarely. Her voice through the door sounds, you can't describe it. More itself than you expected, more present, more there. After about 10 minutes, Mrs. Durwood opens the door. She's holding the nail. It is a small iron nail, maybe 3 inches long, slightly bent from use. She closes her hand around it. Through the open door you can see Margaret Fielding on her bed, looking at the wall where the marks are. 2 years of days scratched into old stone. A calendar of a kind that nobody outside this building is ever going to read. Then the door closes. Mrs. Durwood looks at the nail in her hand. She asked, she says, if she could have a piece of chalk instead. You look at her. Something that will wash off, she says. Something that isn't. She opens her hand, looks at the nail. Something that doesn't look like what this looks like. A piece of chalk, so that a woman can mark her days without anyone seeing a nail and thinking, danger. Without the institutional machinery deciding that the counting of days is a symptom of something. Is there chalk, you ask? In the apothecary's room, Mrs. Durwood says. "They use it for labelling. I'll get some tomorrow." She looks at the nail one more time. Then she puts it in her coat pocket and walks away down the corridor. You stand there for a moment. Through the door of cell 3 there is silence. Then, very faintly, the sound of Margaret Fielding's breathing. Slow, even. The sound of a person who has been in a very difficult situation for a very long time and has found, inside that situation, a way to keep going. You go down to the keeper's room. You eat your bread. You drink your small beer. Ellis tells you something that happened on the morning round that you half listen to and half don't. Cook comes in for his pre-shift meal, sits heavily, says nothing. Outside, the bells are marking 8. Across the city, in houses you've never been in and never will be, people are finishing their suppers and going to their fires and reading their newspapers and not thinking about this building at all. The merchants of Cheapside, the watermen on the river, the governors who walked the gallery this morning and the carriages that took them home, Lady Grosvenor in her house with her long memory, the young man in the grey coat wherever he is, thinking maybe about the philosopher and his categories, or not thinking about it, or thinking about something else entirely because he can. You finish your beer, you go upstairs. The attic room is the same. Cold floor, cold window, the faint smell of everything below seeping up through the floorboards. Ellis is already behind you on the stairs. Cook is heading to the gallery for his shift. You sit on your cot and unlace your shoes. The city outside the small window is doing what it always does. The lanterns, the smoke, the distant bells. Not silent, never silent, just quieter. A lower register. You think about what William Marsh said about Arthur Leeds, about the dog on Hampstead Heath, and the pull of the lead on the uphill stretch, and the view from the top. You think about Margaret Fielding and her piece of chalk. You think about a piece of chalk on a wall, about marks that wash off, and marks that don't, and the difference between them. You lie back on the cot. The ceiling is cracked and patched and cracked again. The old plaster of a building that has been many things and is now this, and will probably be this for a long time yet, because the alternative requires imagining something better, and imagining something better requires money and will, and the particular quality of attention that Lady Grosvenor has been applying to this institution for 30 years, and which has moved things, genuinely moved things, from chains around necks to something less, and from something less to something still less bad, and from still less bad toward what? You don't know. You're 19 years old, and you've been here 6 weeks, and you don't know what it's moving toward. You know what it is now. The cold gallery, the small windows, the daily machinery of management and bread and chamber pots, the visitors on Sundays with their notebooks, the physicians' careful language, the governors with their questions, the patients in their cells counting their days. You know that George Appleton has been in this building since before you were born. You know that Sarah Dobbs keeps track of things. You know that Mrs. Durwood's lavender cost her something she can barely afford. You know that a man's desire to see the sky from somewhere that isn't a window is simultaneously a danger to the institution and the most human thing you've encountered in 6 weeks. These things don't resolve into anything simple. They sit in you, the way things sit in a person who is still young enough to be surprised by them, but not young enough to dismiss them. The bells strike 9. The official waking hours are over. Below you, the gallery settles into its night rhythms. The murmuring, the knocking. The philosopher probably still talking to his ceiling, still pursuing the categories of the world with the tireless energy of a mind that cannot find an off switch. Margaret Fielding in her cell, her wall bare. Arthur Leeds in his cell, his window nailed shut. William Marsh with his book turned toward the absent light, and George Appleton with his chain and his small window and his 11 years. All of them in the building below you, all of them present, entirely present, in their particular ways. And you, Thomas Hadley, 19 years old, 6 weeks in this place, lying on a cot in an attic room with the smell of the institution in your coat, and the cold of the stone floor still in the soles of your feet, and the long, strange, difficult day slowly unfolding out of your muscles. Sleep is coming. You can feel it at the edges. The way exhaustion eventually brings sleep, even when the mind is still moving, still processing, still trying to make sense of things that don't want to make sense. Tomorrow is Thursday, not a visitor day. Just the gallery and the morning round and the bread and the chamber pots and the small incremental work of keeping. Just Bethlem on a Thursday morning. Your eyes are heavy. The last sound you hear, before the city's noise blurs into the background, before the particular machinery of consciousness begins to slow, is the bells. Not just one. Never just one. St. Giles and St. Luke's, and further away, the vast authoritative voice of St. Paul's, marking the quarter hour in their overlapping, slightly off from each other voices, the way 12 clocks in the same room never quite agree on the exact moment, the way the city is always slightly out of synchrony with itself, always slightly ahead and slightly behind, and never quite precisely now. But the bells keep ringing anyway. They have been ringing since before this hospital stood on this ground. They will be ringing long after. You sink. The ceiling above you goes soft in your vision. The cracks in the plaster becoming something else, something easier, the particular blankness of a mind releasing its grip on the day. Below you, the gallery breathes. You breathe with it. Thursday is coming. The morning round is coming. The bread and the bucket and the cold water in the sluice and the 30 seconds at the window looking out over moorfields. Mrs. Durward with her chalk in the morning. Small things that matter more than you expected. You let the city carry you. The sound of it, the distant bells, the night carts on the cobbles, the low hum of a place that never fully stops, becomes the sound of all the Thursdays ahead of you, stretching into a future you can't see and can't plan but will live through, one morning round at a time. There will be things you get wrong. You know this already. You've been here 6 weeks and you have already gotten things wrong, and you will get more wrong as the weeks become months, as the months accumulate into the shape of something you might later call a career, or a calling, or simply the thing you did with this portion of your life. There will be patients you can't help. There will be administrative decisions that grind you down. There will be visitors who laugh at things that should not be laughed at, and physicians who say things that are technically accurate but not true, and governors who ask good questions and then go back to their carriages. There will be mornings so cold your hands don't work properly until the 3rd cell. There will also be, you don't know what else there will be, but something. Something that looks like Mrs. Durward and lavender. Something that looks like chalk instead of a nail. Something that looks like a young man in a grey coat saying, "I thought you were right," through an iron grate to a man everyone else has been calling mad. Something small. That matters. You are asleep. Outside, London continues, as it always continues, as it continued before you came here and will continue long after. The great grinding city of 500,000 lives, and the river moving through the heart of it, and the ships on the river and the bells over all of it, marking time that does not slow down and does not speed up, just moves steadily, carrying everything in it. This building will change. Not soon, not quickly, not without the kind of effort that takes decades and generations and people who refuse to stop pushing even when the institution resists. But it will change. The chains will come out, all of them, eventually. The visitors will be turned away. Not yet. Not for another 50 years or more. But eventually the city will decide that a paying gallery of the mad is not the kind of thing a civilization should offer for a penny, and the gates will close to that. Better things are possible. This is true. You cannot see them from where you are lying on your cot in 1763, but they are coming. People are even now writing the pamphlets and asking the questions and sitting in the uncomfortable chairs of the parliamentary committee rooms and saying, this is not good enough. This is not what medicine should be. This is not what we owe to these people. They are not here yet. But they are coming. For now it is Thursday morning in a few hours, and the bells have not yet struck and the city is as quiet as it gets. And in a building on the north side of Moorfields, 12 men and 12 women are sleeping, or trying to, or lying awake watching their patch of sky. And in the attic room above all of them, a keeper is sleeping. Thomas Hadley, 19 years old, 6 weeks in this place, with chalk on his mind and a woman's voice through a door in his memory, and a man's words about a dog on Hampstead Heath, and all of it settling into him the way things settle into a person who is paying attention. Thursday comes the way Thursdays do in institutions, not announced, not different from what preceded it. Just the next morning arriving in the same order as the morning before. Bells, cold, the smell finding you before your eyes open. The difference, which is not a dramatic difference, but which you notice in the way you notice all small things now, the way 6 weeks of attention to small things has calibrated your senses toward them, is that the morning has a particular quality of stillness. No visitor preparation, no governors, just the gallery and the round and the bread and the work. You dress in the cold. The hole in your left sock heel has gotten larger. Your coat smells of the building, of the particular compound smell that you have accepted you cannot wash out, that lives in the wool now and will probably live there until the coat wears out. Vickers meets you at the gallery door. He looks at you the way he looks at you most mornings. That particular keeper's assessment, checking for readiness in the way you'd check a tool before using it, and says, Cell 9, Leeds, new sash is in, nails are in the night book. How is he? Quiet. Same. The same that means not worse, which in this building is what fine means. You go to cell 9 first. The window has a new latch, iron, bolted into the frame with 4 nails that you can see are properly seated, the wood tight around them. The counterweights are still there, but the sash won't move more than 2 inches now, which is enough air and no more. You look at it for a moment before you unlock the door. Think about what it means to nail a window against a man who wanted to see the sky. Then you knock, the way you always knock, and unlock the door. And Arthur Leeds is sitting on his bed looking at the new latch. Good morning, Mr. Leeds. He looks at the latch. They moved quickly. Standard procedure. He looks down at his hands. They are the hands of a man who used to do outdoor work. Broad across the knuckles, the skin on them thickened in the way that comes from years of something physical. Gardening, maybe, or carpentry. His record doesn't say. What's the weather? You look at the small barred window, through it. Grey sky, as always, but with a particular quality to the grey today. Cold, you say. Clear, I think. The clouds are thin. He nods as if this is useful information. which in a way, for a man whose weather forecasting is done entirely through a rectangle of sky, no bigger than a handkerchief, it is. You bring his bread. You leave him sitting with it, looking at his barred window. The morning round takes you through all 16 cells and produces nothing unexpected, which is its own kind of relief. The relief of a day that begins without crisis. The philosopher is mid-lecture. James Crow is on his bed, still quiet, still eating, which is progress of a kind. William Marsh is awake and watching the door, which means he's waiting for something, though you don't know what. You find out what at the midday round. Vickers tells you at 11. Marsh has a visitor, 2 o'clock. Wife. The word wife carries weight in this building that is different from its weight elsewhere. A wife in this context means a person who signed papers, who made a decision that her husband then had no say in, who has, for the 9 months since February, presumably been living her life in their house in Suffolk without him, and who is now coming to see him, and nobody on this gallery knows whether that is an act of love or an act of something else or both simultaneously. Visitors to individual patients come through the south entrance separately from the public gallery visitors. They're seen in a room on the ground floor that is slightly nicer than the rest of the building. 2 chairs, a table, a small fire, and a keeper sits in the corner of the room during the visit, not participating, just present, just the institutional witness that everything that happens in this building has. The keeper is usually Vickers for the men's gallery visits, but Vickers has to be on the gallery at 2 because Cook won't be in until 3, and so... You'll do the Marsh visit, Vickers says. You think about this. Is that standard? It's necessary, Vickers says, which is not quite the same thing. You spend the period between 11 and 2 doing the afternoon tasks in the kind of suspended animation time that precedes things you're uncertain about. The straw check, the round of water distributions, the small wooden cup carried to each cell, the cold water from the tap on the ground floor carried up in a covered pitcher that loses about 1/4 of its heat on the stairs. At 1:45, you go down to the ground floor and wait in the visiting room. The room is, as stated, slightly nicer than the rest of the building. The chairs are padded. The table has a cloth on it, grey linen, faded but present. The fire is small but real, and the warmth of it is noticeable. The kind of warmth that doesn't reach the edges of the room, but creates a zone of something tolerable in the centre. The steward's assistant shows the visitor in at 2 o'clock exactly. Her name, from William Marsh's record, is Catherine Marsh. She is 25. She's wearing a good wool dress. Not expensive, but not cheap. The dress of a woman who takes care of what she has. Her hair is under a plain cap. She is, by any assessment, a person doing her best in a situation she did not design. She looks at you when she comes in, takes in your coat and your position in the corner. You're the keeper? Yes, ma'am, Thomas Hadley. She nods once. Then she takes her seat, the one facing the door, which is where you sit, a visitor facing the door to the gallery so the patient comes in to face them. She folds her hands in her lap and looks at the table. William Marsh comes down the stairs with Vickers. You hear the footsteps. Then the door opens and Marsh comes in, and you see something you've not seen on the gallery, which is William Marsh being surprised. Just for a fraction of a second, before his face rearranges itself, he looks surprised. Not at his wife's presence, which he presumably knew about, but at her appearance, at the specific herness of her in this room, which is different from her in his memory of 9 months ago. Then the rearrangement completes, and he sits down across from her, and Vickers closes the door from outside, and you are in the corner. Catherine, he says. William. She looks at him for a moment. You look thin. The food isn't. He stops. Starts differently. I'm well enough. She's watching his face with the particular intensity of a person who's been trying to read something for a long time and is not sure if they're succeeding. The children are well, she says. James has a cough, but it's clearing. The baby is walking now. His expression does something complicated and quick. She's walking. Since October. He is very still for a moment. I didn't... He stops again. There is a quality to his stops that you have not heard on the gallery, where his speech is careful and controlled and slightly performative in the way of a man who knows he's being observed and calibrates accordingly. Here the stops are different. Here they are, the stops of a man trying to speak accurately about something large. I didn't think she'd be walking yet, he says. She's fast, Catherine says. Knocks things over. Something happens on his face that is briefly, completely unguarded. Something that is just a father being told about his child. Then it closes. How is the business? He asks. Your brother has been helping. We're managing. The North accounts. Your brother is handling them, William. She leans forward slightly. I didn't come to talk about the accounts. A pause. Why did you come? He asks. Not hostile. Something quieter than hostile. Something closer to genuine. She looks at her hands for a moment. Then, Dr. Monroe says you're improving. Does he? He says the episodes haven't recurred. They haven't. He says it's possible with continued improvement. She stops, recalibrates. He says there may be a path to discharge with appropriate supervision. Marsh is very still now. The quality of stillness he has in his cell when he's listening to the gallery at night through the floor. When, he says. One word. He didn't give a date. He said it depends on continued progress. She looks at him directly now. He said it depends on you being what he calls cooperative. The word cooperative lands in the room and stays there. You are in the corner. You are watching your hands. You are not in this conversation in any way that matters. You are the institutional witness. That is all. But you can hear the word cooperative echo, and you can hear what's inside it. The version of William Marsh that the physician needs him to be. The appropriate, manageable, cooperative patient who does not argue with visitors and does not point out that his cell is cold and does not say things to young men in grey coats that suggest the diagnostic category might be doing the work of the diagnosis. Marsh looks at the table. I am cooperative, he says, carefully. I know, she says. I'm just... She takes a breath. I'm asking you to keep being cooperative. I'm asking you to not. Another stop. To not do anything that would set things back. You look at the fire. You think about the philosopher's cell. You think about what he said. Apparent lucidity. You think about the way the category protects itself. Catherine, Marsh says, do you believe I'm mad? She's very quiet. I believe, she says after a long pause, that something happened in February that frightened me. I believe that what happened in February could have been much worse than it was. I believe that coming here... She stops. Her hands tighten in her lap. I believe it kept something worse from happening. Do you believe I'm mad? He says again. She looks at him. I believe you're better, she says. I believe you can come home. And I'm asking you to do what needs to be done for that to happen. Her voice is very steady. The baby is walking. James has a cough. I need you home, William. He closes his eyes. Just for a moment. Then he opens them and his face is the face he has on the gallery. Controlled, measured, slightly amused at the wrong angles of the world. I'll be cooperative, he says. She releases a breath. The visit lasts another 20 minutes. They talk about the children. They talk about the business, despite what she said about not talking about it, because the business is their life, and their life is the thing they're trying to get back to. She tells him about a coat she's having made for James. He asks about the neighbour on the left, the one who's been having trouble with his drains. She tells him. He asks about the market near their house, whether the Wednesday market is still running, she tells him. Ordinary conversation. The ordinary conversation of two people who are married and who know each other's daily textures, conducted across a table in a room that smells of the institution and the small fire, with a keeper in the corner who is studying his hands. When she stands to leave, she reaches across the table and takes his hand. Just for a second. Just briefly. Then she lets go, and she thanks you as she passes, which surprises you. A thanks directed at you for being in the corner, and then she is gone. You walk Marsh back up the gallery stairs. He doesn't speak until you've passed cell 4, and then he says quietly, "She looked tired." "She seemed well," you say. "She's tired," he says again, as if you hadn't spoken. "She always carries it behind the eyes when she's tired. You have to know where to look." He goes into his cell. You lock the door. You stand in the gallery for a moment. Then you go to do the afternoon water round. By 4 o'clock the afternoon has taken on the quality of late afternoons in November, which is a quality of light dying before the day has finished, and everything continuing in a dimness that feels slightly wrong, slightly out of calibration. You're at the end of the men's gallery with your lamp when you hear it. At first you don't identify it as sound at all, because it has been going on for long enough that you've been absorbing it as background, filing it with the philosopher's voice and the knocking from cell 8 and the low murmuring from further down. But when you stop walking and actually attend to it, you realise what it is. It is coming from cell 14. Cell 14 is occupied by a man named Robert Dolby. He's 34, admitted 7 weeks ago, 1 week before you arrived, so you have no before to compare him to. His record says extreme agitation following financial ruin and lists as contributing factors: debt, a failed business in wool trading, and what the physician wrote as a tendency to violent outbursts which may indicate corrupted animal spirits. You've seen him be occasionally loud. On 2 occasions in your 6 weeks, he has been on Vickers's list of patients requiring extra attention, the kind of list Vickers maintains in his head rather than on paper, and which he communicates in the particular code of the experienced keeper. A look, a slight angling of the body, a barely perceptible nod. What you are hearing now is different from occasional loud. It is rhythmic, a repeated impact, something against the cell wall, slow and deliberate, each impact separated by a count of about 5 seconds, not fast enough to be frantic, too deliberate to be accidental. You move towards cell 14 quickly. Through the grate, Robert Dalby is standing against the far wall, one arm extended, fist closed. He brings it forward and hits the wall, pulls it back. 5 seconds. Again. He is not making a sound with his mouth. Just the impact and the withdrawal and the pause. The knuckles of his right hand are bleeding. You say, "Mr. Dalby, step back from the wall." He brings his fist forward again. "Mr. Dalby." He stops, turns, looks at you through the grate with an expression that is not rage, and is not grief, and is something in between, something that doesn't have a clean name. The face of a person who has run out of words and found this instead. You look at his hand. The blood is not dramatic. 3 or 4 knuckles split. The skin broken the way skin breaks when you hit stone repeatedly with it. Not dangerous. Yet. Step back, you say again. Come to the door. He looks at you for a long moment. Then he takes a step, and another, and he comes to the grate and stands there, hand at his side, and you can see the blood on his knuckles more clearly now. Dark red, the particular colour of blood that's been cooling on skin. Give me your hand, you say. He looks at you. Through the gap, you say. Let me see. He looks at the gap in the grate, the gap designed for the bread distribution, wide enough for a plate, wide enough for a hand. He pushes his hand through. You hold it. It is a large hand, the hand of a man who worked in trade, who lifted bales and turned ledgers and shook other men's hands to seal agreements. It is cold, which is all the hands in this gallery are, but it has a different quality of cold from the air, the cold of something that has been held away from the body for a while. The knuckles are split, but not deeply. The bleeding has mostly stopped on its own. You say, "What was the wall going to tell you?" He looks at you. The expression on his face shifts slightly. Something that might be, in another context, almost surprised. What do you mean? You were listening to it, you say. What you were doing. That's what it looked like you were listening. A long pause. Then, very quietly, I used to think things through when I walked. I'd walk and think, and by the time I got to the end of wherever I was going, I'd have sorted it out. Whatever it was. There's nowhere to walk in here, you say. No. His hand is still in yours through the grate. No, there isn't. You look at the hand, then back at him. You're going to need to clean this, you say. I'll bring water and something for it. And then you stop. You think about what you can offer, what is within your authority, which is not much, what is within your practical capacity, which is also not much. And then I'll ask Mr. Vickers if you can have access to the exercise yard tomorrow morning, if the weather holds. He looks at you. The exercise yard, he says. The words have a particular quality, like something retrieved from a great distance. It's there, you say. Patients use it. Some of them. You're actually not entirely certain which patients are cleared for the yard and which aren't, and this is something you will have to find out from Vickers before you make any commitment. But the commitment is already made, because the man's hand is bleeding, and he needed something concrete, something that was more than get away from the wall. Tomorrow, he says, if I can arrange it. He withdraws his hand from the grate. He looks at it. Then he looks at you. All right, he says. You get water, you get a cloth from the laundry stock on the ground floor, one of the worn linen pieces that get repurposed when they're too thin for actual laundry. You bring them up and you pass them through the grate, and you watch him clean his own hand with a precision and care that surprises you. The careful dabbing of a man who has had to tend small wounds before and knows how to do it without fuss. When he's done, he passes the cloth back through the grate. Thank you, he says. You go to find Vickers. Vickers is in the gallery office, a small room at the top of the stairs that contains a desk and the incident book, and a locked cabinet where certain of the medical supplies are kept. He looks up when you knock. You tell him about cell 14, about the hand, about the exercise yard. He looks at you. The yard, he says. He used to walk to think things through. I thought. I know what you thought. Vickers is quiet for a moment. He's the kind of quiet that processes rather than the kind that objects. Dalby's not been cleared for the yard yet. Protocol is 12 weeks before yard access is reviewed. He's been here 7 weeks. 5 weeks away then. His knuckles, I know. Vickers looks at the incident book, opens it, makes a note. I'll flag it with Monroe. It may be possible to request an early review. He looks at you. No promises to the patient, Hadley. Not until it's been approved. I know what you may have already done. He closes the book. Then we'd better get it approved. He goes down to send a note to the physician's office, and you go back to the gallery, and the afternoon continues. At supper that night, you sit across from a woman you've barely spoken to in 6 weeks. One of the female keepers, whose name is Agnes Hartley, no relation to Lady Grosvenor, and who has been at Bethlem for 3 years, and who you've noticed is very quiet in the way of people who watch rather than speak. She passes you the bread jug without being asked. Then she says, "You were with Mrs. Marsh this afternoon." "Yes." "Did it go well?" You think about it. She seems to want him home. Agnes looks at her food. They usually do at first. A pause. It's 6 months, a year, 2 years later that things get complicated, when the home they're coming back to has changed shape. You look at her. "His daughter is walking," you say. She sounds as if this fact, which you'd thought was uncomplicated, has complications you haven't found yet. "What do you mean?" "Nothing." She takes a piece of bread. "Just when a man comes back from wherever he's been for a long time, the world has kept moving without him. Sometimes that's fine, sometimes..." She breaks the bread. "Sometimes the walking baby is harder than the patient." You sit with this for a moment. "How long have you been here?" you ask. 3 years. "Does it..." You start again. "Does it get easier, working out what to think about all of this?" She looks at you with a directness that reminds you slightly of Mrs. Durwood. That quality of someone who has had time to form precise opinions and doesn't feel the need to hedge them. "No," she says, "but you get better at holding the difficult parts without them breaking you." She takes a bite of bread, which is not the same as easier, but it's what there is. You eat your supper, outside the Thursday night, already quiet, already the city settling into its November darkness. Somewhere above you on the gallery, Cook making his first round of the evening, the familiar heavy tread cell to cell. You go to bed early. You're very tired. You sleep without dreaming, or if you dream you don't remember it, and the bells striking 5 pull you up out of a deep place into the cold attic, and the smell of the building, and Thursday becoming Friday. Friday is the day of the cold bath. You don't know this at breakfast. You know it when Vickers tells you at 8:30, already dressed for the procedure in the particular way that a keeper dresses for something that will be physically demanding. Coat off, sleeves rolled, the expression of a man doing something he believes is medically indicated and finds personally unpleasant. The bath is in the basement. You've been down there once in your first week, when Bain showed you the layout of the building. A room below the ground floor, stone walls, a deep tub sunk into the floor, a pump and a drain. The pump draws water from the same source as the rest of the building. The water is not heated. The patient is Samuel Webb, 38, admitted 4 months ago, who's on the men's gallery in cell 2, the first cell you pass every morning on the round, and whom you have seen every morning for 6 weeks, and with whom you've exchanged very few words because Samuel Webb does not respond well to conversation, specifically does not respond in any consistent way that would indicate he is receiving the conversation as conversation, which his record notes as a primary feature of his presentation. He is large. This is the first thing you notice when you first see him, and it continues to be relevant. A broad man, tall, built like someone who did physical labour for years, now in the institutional linen of the gallery, which does not fit him properly and gives him the strange appearance of something natural being constrained by something administrative. The cold bath is prescribed by Dr. Monroe as part of Samuel Webb's treatment. The records show he has received it twice before, both without incident. Vickers performs it. You're there to assist and to learn the procedure. You go down the stairs to the basement. The tub is full. Someone, cook, you think, from the night round, has filled it in preparation. The water is the colour of the building's water, which is a flat grey clear that you've stopped noticing. It is very cold. You can see that from across the room, the particular quality of cold water in a cold stone room. The orderly, a man who works specifically for this kind of physical management, larger than you, named Francis, who communicates almost entirely in grunts, has already brought Samuel Webb down. He is sitting in the wooden chair that serves as the waiting position, not restrained but flanked by Francis, looking at the tub with no particular expression. Vickers explains the procedure, not to Webb, or not primarily to Webb, but to you, with the professional tone of clinical instruction. The treatment, he says, stimulates the vital spirits, addresses the lassitude of the constitution. Dr. Monroe believes. He pauses very slightly. A pause so small you would miss it if you weren't already calibrated to his pauses. The treatment is standard for the condition as diagnosed. You look at the tub. How long, you ask? 1 minute, 2 at most, in and out. Does he? You stop. Think about how to ask this. Does he understand what's happening? Vickers looks at Samuel Webb, who is still looking at the tub with that flat, unreadable expression. Hard to say, Vickers says. Ready. It takes all three of you. Not because Webb resists, which is the word you expected, but because he doesn't actively cooperate, which is different. He doesn't fight and he doesn't help. He's large and passive, and you and Francis and Vickers maneuver him to the edge of the tub and then into it, step by step, with a kind of three-person coordination that you have not practiced and that requires a good deal of adjusting. The moment the cold water hits him, he makes a sound. Just one sound. A sharp, sudden exhalation. Not quite a word, not quite a cry. Just air, forced out by the shock of it. Then nothing. He goes silent. He's in the water to his chest. His hands, which have been passive until now, grip the sides of the tub. You are watching his face. His face does something in the cold water that it has not done in the gallery. Something comes into it. Not peace, not exactly, but presence. The flat, elsewhere quality that his expression usually carries is briefly replaced by something more immediate, more here, more in the room. 45 seconds. Vickers counts under his breath. The water is moving slightly, disturbed by Webb's entry. Your own hands are wet from the manoeuvring and they are very cold. You keep them at your sides. 1 minute. Vickers says, right. Getting him out is the reverse of getting him in, and wet he is heavier, and the stone floor of the basement is slippery, and you nearly go down once and Francis catches your elbow and you don't. They wrap him in a rough linen sheet. There is a stack of these against the wall, already there for this purpose, and Francis sits him back in the chair. He is shaking. A fine, persistent tremor that runs through his whole body, visible in his hands, in his shoulders. He is looking at the tub, not the way he looked at it before. Something different now, something that is definite looking, rather than merely pointing his eyes in a direction. You crouch down. You don't know why you do this. It is not what Vickers is doing. Vickers is already making notes on the procedure card, so that you are at his level, your face approximately even with his. He looks at you. His eyes are there. That's the word. There. Which sounds inadequate, but which you will struggle to improve on. The flat interior distance has reduced. He is looking at you and seeing you, and there is some exchange happening that does not require words because words are not what this moment is built of. "You're all right," you say. He keeps looking at you. "The shaking will stop," you say. "You're all right." The tremor in his hands is slowing, not gone, but the first terrible peak of it has passed. He closes his eyes. You stand up. Vickers is making his notes. His face says nothing. He finishes the card and hands it to you to hold while he refastens his cuffs. "Good," he says, meaning the procedure, meaning it was correctly performed, meaning nothing else. You bring Webb back up the stairs with Francis, back to cell 2, back to the straw bed and the barred window and the grey Friday afternoon that is already the same as the grey Thursday afternoon was, the same as all the afternoons in this gallery are to each other, each one distinct only in the small particulars. You lock the door. Samuel Webb lies down on his bed, still wrapped in the linen sheet, still shaking, though more finely, more privately now. He turns toward the wall. You stand at the door for a moment. Then you go. Friday afternoon. The routine, the round, the bread, the chamber pots. At 3 o'clock, Robert Dalby's exercise yard access comes back from the physician's office. Approved. Pending 3 days of stable observation beginning Saturday. You go to cell 14 and you tell him through the grate. He looks at you for a moment. His hand has been wrapped, a strip of clean linen that Mrs. Durward gave you yesterday evening when you mentioned it in passing, and the wrapping is still in place, slightly loosened but holding. 3 days, he says. Observation, standard procedure. Then the yard. Then the yard. He sits on his bed. He looks at his hands, the wrapped one and the other. Saturday, he says. Saturday you start the 3 days. If it goes well, Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest. He nods. He doesn't say anything else. You don't need him to. Sometimes the thing that matters about an exchange has already happened by the time words are finished. You go to the end of the gallery. Friday at 5 o'clock. The light is gone, the early dark of a November in London pressing through the windows, and you're standing at the gallery window with your lamp and looking out at nothing much. The black rectangle of moorfields, the few lights at its edges, the faint glow of the city beyond it, and you're thinking about the cold bath, about Samuel Webb's hands on the sides of the tub, about the look on his face when he came into contact with the cold and for a moment was completely involuntarily present. You are thinking about whether that presence was medicine or just the body's shock, whether they are different things, whether it matters which one it is. You're 19 years old and you do not have the training to answer this question. You do not have the authority to ask it officially. It is not your department, but you carry it down the stairs with you, and it stays on you through supper and into the evening. At 8 o'clock, in the keeper's room with your final cup of beer, you hear the sounds from above, the gallery sounds, the philosopher on his usual frequency, the rhythmic sound from cell 8, and then something else, something new, or something you've heard before but which tonight has a specific quality that makes you put your cup down. 2 voices, through the ceiling, 2 distinct voices, low and slightly apart in pitch, going back and forth in a way that is clearly conversation. Conversation at 8 o'clock on a Friday night in the men's gallery between cells. You go up. The gallery at night with your lamp, the cells dark, the sounds coming from you cannot immediately tell where. You walk the corridor, slowly, and then you can tell, between cells 9 and 10, between Arthur Leeds and the man in 10, whose name is John Cartwright, 29, who's been here 5 months and who is one of the quieter patients, the kind whose quietness makes him easy to overlook and is probably therefore more carefully attended to than those who make their presence continuously felt. Leads's voice through the grate of cell 9, and the road goes straight north from the heath, past Hampstead village, and if you go left at the church you start to climb, and the climb takes about 20 minutes if you're not pushing. Cartwright's voice from cell 10. But the view. What's the view from the top? On a clear day, Leeds pauses. On a clear day you can see the dome of St. Paul's. You can see all the way to the hills south of the river. You can see the whole city as if it's a drawing of itself. You stand in the corridor. Through the grates on either side of you, 2 men in cells 9 and 10, talking across the space between them in the dark, are going to Hampstead Heath, are climbing the hill, are looking at the view that Arthur Leeds remembers and John Cartwright has never seen. You stand there for a long time. Then you carry your lamp to the end of the gallery and you lean against the window wall in the dark and you listen. Not close enough to be intrusive, far enough that the words blur into tone, into the sound of 2 human beings engaged in the basic human activity of keeping each other company through a bad night by going somewhere together in their heads. It is 8:30 when the voices stop. Silence. Then from cell 9, Arthur Leeds's voice, very quiet, just to himself. Good night, John. From cell 10, after a moment. Good night, Arthur. You extinguish your lamp, you go to bed. Saturday arrives in stages. The bells, the cold, the smell. But there is something different about Saturday. Saturday has a quality that you can only describe as the quality of the day before Sunday, a kind of gathering tension that the building seems to feel without understanding, some low-frequency awareness that tomorrow the gates will open and the gallery will fill with strangers. You feel it in yourself too. The pre-Sunday tightening, the mental inventory of which patients are volatile and which are settled, and where the risks are and where the things are that the visitors will point at. You do the morning round, you bring the bread, you check Samuel Webb, who is stable. The cold bath's effects have settled into something quieter, and he is in his usual state, which is a state you've come to think of as deeply interior, in the way of a man who has gone somewhere inside himself that is not immediately accessible from outside. You check Robert Dalby, who is also stable, day 1 of his 3-day observation period, and he is sitting on his bed, not hitting the wall, not anything, just sitting. The way a man sits when he is exercising a decision. You check the philosopher, who is mid-lecture at 7 in the morning, which means he either didn't sleep or woke very early and immediately began. You listen for a moment. He is discussing the nature of the institution, the way the institution creates the concept it requires to justify its own existence. You have to stop listening because it is either very sharp or very ill, and you can't tell which, and the not being able to tell is starting to bother you in a way that requires you to move away from the grate before you stand there much longer. You check William Marsh. He's sitting with his book, but the book is closed, and he is looking at the wall. Morning, you say. Morning. He looks at the closed book. She looked tired, he says. You said that yesterday. I'm still saying it. He puts the book on the bed beside him. She's carrying everything, the children, the business, all of it. 9 months. She seems capable, you say, which is not untrue. Catherine Marsh seemed very capable. She is capable, he says. That's not the point. He looks at the book. The point is that capability is not the same as not needing help. She's capable and she needs help, and I am in this room and cannot give it. You say, the physician thinks improvement is possible. The physician thinks cooperative is possible, Marsh says, which is not the same thing. He opens the book. He's done talking. You can see it in the way he opens it, the slight deliberate settling of his shoulders. You go. At 10 o'clock you're on the women's gallery, covering for a female keeper named Price who is ill, and Mrs. Durwood is showing you the Saturday morning routine, which differs from the weekday morning routine in ways you're expected to memorize quickly. Saturday is deep clean, she says. The cells where it's needed. Fresh straw across the board if there's enough in the store. Window checks. All the windows? All of them. Sunday the visitors come. I want every window checked and every grate checked, and every cell that has a removable object to have those objects removed to the stores. You think about Margaret Fielding and her piece of chalk. Mrs. Durwood. The chalk is fine, she says, without turning around. I checked it this morning. She's using it on the wall beside the window, not inside it where visitors can't see. A pause. And if they could see it, it's chalk marks on a wall. People put chalk marks on walls. She opens the store cupboard and begins pulling out fresh straw in the tied bundles that come up from the yard. Here, she says, handing you a bundle. Start at cell 1. You start at cell 1. Cell 1 is Mary Blanchard, who is sitting on her bed the same way she sits every morning, hands folded, eyes on the wall. The fresh straw goes down around the edges and under the bed. The smell of it, clean and dusty and faintly sweet, briefly displacing the other smell, the good smell of new things before the new wears off. She doesn't speak. In cell 3, Margaret Fielding is standing at her window. When you open the door with Mrs. Durwood in the doorway, she turns and looks at you both, and you see on her face the expression of someone who has learned to assess the meaning of a door opening. Who is it? What do they want? Good or bad? In about 2 seconds. When she sees Mrs. Durwood, her face settles. On the wall beside her window in chalk, there is a column of marks. The chalk is a pale yellow, the kind you find in apothecary supplies, and the marks are small and precise, the same careful precision you'd expect from a woman who spent 6 months making marks with a nail. They run from the level of her shoulder to about 2/3 of the way down the wall, close enough to the window that the light would hit them in the morning. It washes off, Margaret Fielding says, looking at Mrs. Durwood. I know, Mrs. Durwood says. We're just doing fresh straw today, Mrs. Fielding. Carry on. She turns back to the window. You put down the fresh straw. You don't look at the marks on the wall, not directly. It feels like the wrong kind of looking. But in your peripheral vision you can see them, the column of them, the days. In cell 7, the one whose previous keeper Jennings used to sit with her in the evenings, the woman whose name is Eleanor Parks is awake. She's almost always awake. The distinction between her being awake and being asleep is unclear from outside the cell. But her eyes are open and following you as you come in with the straw. She doesn't speak. She hasn't spoken in 14 months, the record says, but she follows you with her eyes. From the door to the corner, from the corner to the window, from the window back to the door. The slow tracking of something that is taking in information even if it's doing nothing visible with it. You say, as you reach the door again, Good morning, Mrs. Parks. Her eyes find yours. 1 second. 2. Then her gaze moves to Mrs. Durwood in the doorway. Straw's fresh, you say. Windows clear. This is the daily report, spoken to Mrs. Durwood, but in the room, in earshot. in the presence of Eleanor Parks, who may or may not be receiving it. You go to the next cell. At noon on Saturday, Sarah Dobbs calls to you through her grate. You're passing her cell on the way back from the window check at the far end of the gallery, and her voice is quiet but direct, the voice of someone who has timed this and chosen the moment carefully. Mr. Hadley, you stop. Through the grate, her face, those sharp, cataloguing eyes, looking at you with the particular focus she reserves for things she has decided need examining. Ma'am, you were at the governor's tour on Wednesday. Yes. The woman with the stick, Lady something, she was talking to you at the window. Lady Grosvenor, she was asking about the gallery. What did you tell her? You look at her. You look at the position of Mrs. Durwood, who is 3 cells down and occupied. You look back at Sarah Dobbs. I told her small things matter more than I expected, you say. Something moves in her face. The focused expression doesn't change, but there is something behind it that shifts. Do you think that's true? She asks. I think I said it because it was true, you say. She's quiet for a moment. Then, my husband told the physician I was writing letters to people he didn't approve of. You say nothing. I was writing letters to people who were trying to change things, she says, about wages, about working conditions in the mills, about, she stops, tilts her head slightly, about exactly the sort of thing the physician and my husband would agree I should not be writing about. You stand there. Mrs. Dobbs, I know, she says. I know what I should and shouldn't say to a keeper. I've been here 3 months and I've worked it out. She looks at you with that directness. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just telling you, because you told me something true, and it seemed fair. A pause. The woman with the stick, she says. Lady Grosvenor, does she have influence here? She's a significant benefactor. She's been on the committee since a long time. Could she? She stops herself, looks at the grate, looks back at you. Never mind. I know you can't answer that. You stand there for a moment. Then you say, I can't make any promises, Mrs. Dobbs, and I won't pretend I can, but the physician's assessment is reviewed quarterly, and the next quarterly review is in, you do the calculation, about 6 weeks. Her eyes do something quick and precise. 6 weeks, she says. That's what I know, you say. That's all I know. She nods once, very slightly. Then she steps back from the grate and goes to her bed and sits down and picks up something. You can't see what from the grate, and begins to read or write or do whatever it is she does with the hours. You go to find Mrs. Durwood. You find her at the end of the gallery, looking out the window the same way you look out the window from the men's gallery, with the same 30-second quality of suspended attention. Mrs. Durwood, you say, is there a way, formally, for a patient's case to be reconsidered before the quarterly review? She doesn't turn from the window. If there's new medical information, the physician can request an early assessment. What constitutes new medical information? A pause. A significant change in the patient's presentation, she says. An improvement or a deterioration. Or if new facts about the circumstances of admission came to light. She turns then, looks at you with that measuring look. That's a question for the physician, she says, not for me, and not for you. She looks at you for another moment. But I note that Lady Grosvenor is on the committee, and that Lady Grosvenor has a long memory and particular views on patient welfare. She turns back to the window. That's all I'll say. You go back to the men's gallery. Saturday afternoon. The cleaning continues. You sweep. You check. You distribute the extra blankets that Mrs. Durward ordered specifically for the cold snap that Vickers says is coming. The forecast are based on the quality of the sky and the behaviour of certain birds that Vickers watches from the gallery windows on his morning round. The blankets come up from the stores 2 at a time, rough wool, heavy. You go cell to cell. Arthur Leeds takes his without speaking, but he looks at it with a recognition that you understand now. The recognition of a man who knows the cold in here, and who has the pragmatism of the long-term patient about anything that improves his conditions. You get to George Appleton's cell. You stand outside for a moment before you open it, the way you always stand outside it for a moment. Then you unlock the door. He's at his window, the small barred rectangle of sky. His hand up, fingers spread, the way it was the other day, the way it sometimes is, not reaching, touching. The chain runs from his wrist to the wall slack. You put the blanket down just inside the door, which is as far as you go into Appleton's cell. Then you say, "Extra blanket, Mr. Appleton. Cold snap coming." He doesn't move. You stand there for a moment. 11 years, you think. This is what you can't stop thinking when you're in this cell. 11 years in this room, while everything outside changed. While the city built things and burned things and went to war and came back from war and built more things. While children were born who are now older than he was when he came here. "Good night," you say, which is wrong. It is afternoon, not night, but which is what comes out. You lock the door. You continue the round. Saturday evening brings cook and the exchange of information that constitutes the shift handover. Who is stable? Who is less stable? Which cells need checking first? Where the medical flag is on the board? And then you are off, and you eat your bread and your thin whatever it is, and you go to the attic room. Ellis is there, already on his cot, reading something by the light of a tallow candle. He looks up when you come in. "Hear about the Sunday visit," he says. "Which one?" "The college group. Medical students, apparently. Monroe's bringing them through." Ellis goes back to his book. "Should be entertaining. Last time there was a student group, one of them fainted." "Which patient?" you ask. Ellis looks up. "What?" "Which patient made the student faint?" He looks at you with a slightly puzzled expression. "Appleton, I think." "Why?" You take your coat off and hang it on the end of the cot. "Just asking," you say. You lie down. The attic ceiling, the cracks in the plaster. Tomorrow is Sunday. Sunday is the day you've been learning to dread and to prepare for simultaneously. Because both responses are appropriate and neither is sufficient. Sunday is the day that London comes to look. They begin arriving at 10 when the gate opens. You've been on the men's gallery since 7 doing the Sunday round, which includes everything the daily round includes plus specific preparation for the public presence. The cells checked and rechecked, the grates secure, your own position confirmed with Vickers, the particular script of the day, the phrases to use, the phrases to avoid, the geography of your own body in the gallery that communicates to visitors that certain things are and are not available to them. The medical students come first at 10:30, 15 of them from Bart's, accompanied by 2 professors and Dr. Monroe himself, who will lecture as he goes. They are young, most of them in their late teens or early 20s, faces ranging from clinical interest to visible apprehension, to one student who you will spend the next hour watching, because his expression is doing something more complicated than either. They come up the stairs and they fill the gallery in a way that is different from the penny visitors because they come with notebooks and the language of medicine and the assumption that what they are seeing is clinical material rather than spectacle. But the line between clinical material and spectacle is thin when the clinical material is a human being looking back at you through a grate. Dr. Monroe begins with the philosopher. He explains the case, the duration, the symptom profile, the treatment prescribed and its effects. The students make notes. One of them, the one with the complicated expression, looks at the philosopher rather than at Monroe as Monroe speaks. The philosopher is going. He is always going. This morning he is covering new territory. You catch the phrase, the medical gaze, and the way in which observation itself performs what it claims only to observe, which is either insight or symptom or both, as always. The student with the complicated expression writes something down. The group moves on. At cell 6, a patient named Gerald Soames, 51, who has episodes of what the records call violent religious excitement, but who in his calm period sits very still and looks at his hands, is calm this morning. He is sitting, looking at his hands. Dr. Monroe explains the case and the treatment and the expected prognosis. One of the professors says, "And in your assessment, what is the physiological basis of the religious excitement?" Dr. Monroe says, "An imbalance in the vital spirits, likely exacerbated by..." Gerald Soames looks up. He looks at the professor with an expression of mild interest, as if a conversation has become audible that he hadn't previously noticed. "The blood," he says, clearly, conversationally. "It's in the blood. I can feel it running wrong." A brief silence. Dr. Monroe says, "The patient sometimes engages with discussion of his condition, which can itself be a symptom of..." "I feel it," Gerald Soames says, with the same mild conversational quality. "Running wrong. Like something in a mill that's not seated right. You can hear it if you listen." The student with the complicated expression is writing fast. The group moves on. At William Marsh's cell, Dr. Monroe pauses. He explains the case. Duration, diagnosis, treatment. He mentions that the patient is under consideration for eventual discharge pending continued improvement. Marsh, through the grate, says, "Good morning." Dr. Monroe says, "Mr. Marsh." "The students," Marsh says. He's looking at them. The 15 of them with their notebooks and their young faces. "You're learning medicine?" One of the students, not the complicated one, a different one, taller, with the manner of someone who has been brought up to believe his questions are important, says, "We are." "What have you learned today?" Marsh asks. The student looks at Dr. Monroe, then back at the grate. "We've been learning about presentations of mania and melancholia, the treatment protocols." "And what do the patients seem like to you?" Marsh asks. The student opens his mouth and closes it. "From the outside," Marsh says. "From where you're standing. What do they seem like?" Dr. Monroe says, "I think we should move along." The group moves along. The complicated student, passing your position at the far end of the gallery, pauses for a moment. He is perhaps 20. He has dark eyes and ink-stained fingers and the look of someone who has been thinking about something for a long time and has arrived at a place where the thinking requires some kind of action, and he is trying to work out what that action is. He looks at you. "Have you worked here long?" he asks. 6 weeks, you say. "Is it..." He stops, starts again. "What's it like?" You look at him for a moment. He is asking sincerely. You can tell the difference now. After 6 weeks in a building where you spend a good portion of your time reading faces and voices for information that words alone don't carry. "It's a long day," you say, "and the nights can be longer." He looks down the gallery, at the cells, the grates, the morning light coming in through the north windows. "The man in the first cell," he says. "He was talking about something running wrong, the blood." "Mr. Soames," you say, "is that—" He lowers his voice slightly. "Is that a symptom, or is that a description?" You look at him. "I'm not a physician," you say. "No, but you're here every day. You see them every day." He's watching you with those dark eyes. Do you think he's describing something real? The question sits in the air of the gallery. Around you, the medical students are continuing their tour, gathering at cell 8 where Dr. Monroe is explaining something about the classification of chronic presentations, and his voice carries in the stone corridor. "I think," you say carefully, "that he's telling you something true about what he experiences. Whether what he experiences corresponds to something you can measure." You stop. "That's your department, not mine." The student looks at you for a moment longer. Then, "My name is Thomas Wackley." You say, "Thomas Hadley." He nods. He goes to rejoin the group. You stand at the end of the gallery and you watch the group finish their tour and descend the stairs, and you think about a question that is not your department, but which sits in you anyway. What is the difference between a description and a symptom, and who gets to decide, and whether the deciding is itself a kind of symptom of something larger that no one in this building is measuring? Then the penny visitors start arriving. They come in the loose, informal way of people exercising a right, which in a sense they are, because the hospital takes their pennies and gives them the gallery in return, and that is a transaction, and transactions have rights on both sides. They drift up the stairs in groups of 2 and 3 and 5, some of them clearly regulars who know the layout, who know which cells tend to produce interesting presentations, who move with the comfort of the familiar. Others are first-timers, you can tell. They come up the stairs and stop at the top, and they look down the gallery, and their faces do the thing that first-timer faces do. The slight recalibration of expectation against reality. This is the thing about Bethlem that no amount of talking about it quite prepares you for. It is real. The people in the cells are people. When you expect a curiosity and find a person, the gap between expectation and reality registers on the face. Some people manage that gap gracefully. They look, they adjust, they proceed with quiet attention. Some don't. The group you watch most carefully this Sunday is a party of 5 who arrive at 11:30. 2 women, 3 men, all in their 30s, the kind of comfortable London prosperity that wears good clothes and carries itself with the assurance of people who have never had a reason to carry themselves otherwise. They come up the stairs, and immediately the energy of the group is slightly off. There is something in how they move, the elbows, the angles, the quality of the laughter from 2 of the men, that reads as performance. They are performing the act of visiting Bedlam, performing the appropriate responses, performing interest and concern or amusement in the way that people perform things they expect will be looked at. They stop at the philosopher's cell. The philosopher is mid-argument. Today he's covering categories again, and there is a particular line he is on, a specific angle of attack on the question of how institutions create the definitions they require. One of the men laughs, not at something specific the philosopher has said. Just laughs. The laugh of someone who has reached his limit of listening to something that requires engagement and has decided that laughter is an appropriate response. His companion says, "Listen to him, going on." "Like a wind-up clock," the first man says. "Set it going and it just..." You're at the far end of the gallery at your position, and you hear this, and something in you does what things do when they have found the bottom of a patience you didn't know had a bottom. You walk the length of the gallery, not fast, not with the urgency of crisis. but with the deliberate, unhurried walk of someone who has decided to be somewhere and is going there. You stop beside the group. They look at you. The two men and the women and the third man who's been slightly quieter. "Sir," you say to the man who laughed. "Ma'am," to the women. "I'd ask you to keep your voices down on the gallery. It disturbs the patients." The man looks at you. The particular look of a man who paid his penny and considers himself entitled. "He's already disturbed," the man says. The other man laughs. You look at them for a moment. "The gallery's available to visitors," you say, "at the hospital's discretion and within the hospital's rules, which include respectful behaviour toward the patients." You say it the way Vickers would say it, with the flat weight of institutional authority that doesn't require volume. If you're not able to manage that, I'd have to ask you to leave the gallery. The quiet third man says, "Come on, Charles." Charles looks at you for another moment. He's deciding whether this is worth pushing. The calculation plays across his face. He looks away first. "Come on," he says to the group. And they move on down the gallery, and you walk behind them at keep a distance for the rest of their visit, and they leave 20 minutes later without further incident. At the gallery door, the third man, the quiet one, pauses and looks back at you. He nods once. You nod back. The afternoon continues. More visitors, the usual range, the curious and the thoughtful, and the performing and the genuinely affected, and the people looking for entertainment and the people looking for something they can't name, and the children on their fathers' shoulders, who will carry this building in their memories for the rest of their lives without quite knowing why. At 3 in the afternoon, you're back at your position by Appleton's cell, and the gallery is full, perhaps 30 visitors distributed along its length, the most you've seen on a single afternoon. And there is a particular point where you understand something you've been feeling but not naming. You understand that you have become, in 6 weeks, a piece of the gallery. Not in the way the philosopher is or Arthur Leeds is, but in the way that the building itself is, the way the stones are, part of the environment that the visitors move through and look at, and from which they extract whatever it is they come here to extract. You are the keeper. The keeper is part of the exhibit. The keeper who stands at the end of the gallery in his worn coat and his shoes with the iron buckles is as much a part of the show as the patients, in a way you never considered before you were standing here, and which you now cannot stop considering. You watch a woman write in her notebook, and you wonder what she writes about you. The visitors leave by 4, Sunday evening. The gallery settles. You make the round. You bring the bread. You bring the water. You say good evening to Arthur Leeds, who is looking at his nailed window with the expression of a man who has made his accommodation, who's decided to stop spending energy on the window and to spend it on other things instead, like talking to John Cartwright through the grate at night about Hampstead Heath. You say good evening to William Marsh, who is sitting with his closed book again, looking at the wall again. "Bad day?" you ask. "Sundays are Sundays," he says. You think about 30 visitors, about the notebooks, about what gets written. "Yes," you say. "The medical students," he says. "In the morning, the tall one. He asked what the patients seemed like." You heard that? Sound carries. He looks at the closed book. "What did you say to him?" "I told him it was his department." Marsh makes a small sound, not quite a laugh. "Good answer," he says, "but not the true one." You look at him. "What's the true one?" you ask. He looks at the ceiling for a moment. The true one is that they seem like people who are in a terrible position, and that this is both the most obvious thing about them and the thing that gets most efficiently obscured by the process of being here. He looks back at you. The medical students are learning to see patients. What they need to learn is to see people, which is harder because people require more from you. You stand with that for a moment. Cooperative, you say. He looks at you. You said you'd be cooperative, you say. For the discharge, for Catherine, for... I will be, he says. His voice is flat, not hostile, just flat. Is it... You stop. Is it possible to be what they need you to be and still be something? I wasn't going to say it like that. I know. He picks up the closed book, opens it. It's possible, he says, not looking at you. It requires a particular kind of attention, keeping track of which version of yourself you're performing and which version you're actually in. He finds his page. I've been doing it for 9 months. I've gotten rather good at it. He reads. You say good night. Sunday evening and then Sunday night, the same way all the nights progress here, by slowing, by the gradual reduction of the institution's ambient noise level from its daytime frequency to its nighttime frequency, which is never silence but which has a different texture, a different weight. You eat supper. You sit in the keeper's room for a while, just sitting, which is something you do more now than you did in your first weeks, when you used to fill the downtime with movement, with errands, with the anxious activity of someone who feels they should always be doing something visible. Now you can sit. You've learned to sit. It is a skill that this building teaches you because the alternative is exhaustion. Agnes Hartley comes in at 9, finishing a shift. She pours herself a cup of beer and sits at the other end of the table. Good day, she asks. 30 visitors in the afternoon, you say. She nods. Busy. How was Appleton? Same. Same is good, she says. I know. You look at your cup. Mrs. Durwood bought chalk, you say, for Mrs. Fielding. Agnes looks at you with a slight shift in her expression, not surprise, something more like recognition. I know, she says. I saw. She paid for it herself, like the lavender. Like the lavender, Agnes agrees. Why does she do that, you ask? She earns the same we do, less, maybe. Why does she pay for things out of it? Agnes is quiet for a moment. She drinks her beer. Because it matters, she says, and because she's been here long enough to know that if she waits for the institution to care about it, she'll wait forever. She looks at the table. And because she stops, starts again. Because when everything about a person's life has been taken away from them, the things that remain are very small and very important, and someone ought to pay attention to that. She drinks the rest of her beer and stands up. Get some sleep, Hadley, she says. Monday's the start of another week. She goes. You sit for a while longer. Then you go up to the attic. The room is cold. Ellis is asleep. The candle on the windowsill is guttered, the wick black in a pool of cooled tallow. You undress properly tonight for the first time in several days, because the cold snap Vickers predicted hasn't hit yet, and the room is merely cold rather than brutal. You fold your coat over the end of the cot. You sit for a moment on the mattress edge in your shirt sleeves and your stockings, the cold floor under your feet. Outside the small window, the city. You've been here 6 weeks, and the city outside has the quality now of something known rather than something overwhelming. Not small, it will never be small, but navigable. The bells and the smoke and the traffic on Moorfields and the ships on the river that you can't see from here but can feel. Somehow, the massive invisible commerce of the city running in all directions from this point, the way blood runs from the heart. 500,000 people in their Sunday nights. William Marsh in his cell reading. Arthur Leeds looking at his nailed window, George Appleton at his touching the glass, the philosopher probably talking, James Crow eating, getting stronger, Robert Delby on day 2 of his observation period, 3 days until the yard, Samuel Webb after his cold bath in his interior somewhere, Margaret Fielding with her chalk marks, Sarah Dobbs 6 weeks until the quarterly review, Eleanor Parks following someone with her eyes, and Mrs. Durwood, who has been buying lavender for 4 years with her own money, and who gave chalk to a woman who needed to count the days, and who sits with patients when no one requires her to, and Agnes Hartley, who knows the names and uses them, and Vickers, who processes rather than objects, and you, Thomas Hadley, 19, 6 weeks in a building that will never stop teaching you things you didn't know you needed to know, that will add to you daily in ways you can't track, and will only see when you look back from a distance you can't yet imagine. You lie down. The ceiling, the plaster, the thin December light seeping around the edge of the window frame. It is cold enough now that your breath makes small clouds in the air of the attic room. You pull the blanket up, the blanket that you got from the same stores, where this morning you got blankets for the gallery, the same rough wool, the same weight, the institutional blanket that is the same for keepers as for patients, because there is a flaw this institution does not descend below in its provision, and the flaw is the same for everyone. You think about what Agnes said. When everything about a person's life has been taken away, the things that remain are very small and very important. You think about a nail, about chalk marks on a wall, about a man talking about a dog on Hampstead Heath in the dark. You think about what remains. What remains to you right now in this attic room is a cot, a blanket, a coat on the end of the cot, a hole in your left sock, a letter to your mother you haven't written, 17 shillings less than when you arrived, the smell of the building in your hair, and the certain knowledge accumulating daily that what happens in the rooms below you matters. That matters. That's not nothing. That's not nothing at all. The bells strike 10. St. Giles and St. Luke's and the vast deep voice of St. Paul's from across the city, marking the hour in their slightly off unison that you have stopped trying to resolve into a single moment and have started listening to as it is, overlapping, approximate, the city's best collective estimate of where in time it currently is. 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, 6 weeks gone, however many to come. You close your eyes. The cold of the room settles around you, and the blanket holds what warmth there is, and below you the gallery breathes with its particular breath, and somewhere in the building the philosopher is still talking, will probably still be talking when you wake up in the morning, and somewhere George Appleton is at his window or in his bed, and somewhere Arthur Leeds is maybe already talking to John Cartwright through the grates, going back to the heath, going back to the top of the hill, going back to the place where the view is. You breathe with the building, in and out, slow, the body settling into the long, patient pause of sleep. The weeks ahead are the weeks ahead. You will learn them as they come, the way you've learned everything here. One morning round at a time, one cell at a time, one small thing at a time, building something that doesn't have a name yet, and may never have one but, which you feel assembling in you daily. The shape of a person who has learned to see. Let it come. Let sleep take you the way it takes the building, gradually and incompletely, always with something still alert, something still listening, something that doesn't fully shut down, because the thing it listens for, the sound of something that needs attending to, the cry in the dark, the knock on the wall, can come at any hour. But for now, for this hour, there is quiet enough. You have the blanket, you have the cot, you have the ceiling with its cracks that you know now the way you know the gallery floor, by feel, by accumulated familiarity. You're warm enough, fed enough, present enough. You've carried today's weight to the end of today. Let it go now. Let the gallery carry itself for a few hours. Let Cook's heavy footsteps make the round. Let the philosopher talk to his ceiling. Let the bells mark the hours without you counting them. You have earned this rest. This small, insufficient, necessary rest that is what this life offers at the end of a long day. Not answers, not resolution, not the clear conscience of someone who has done everything right, because there is no such thing in this building. There is only the ongoing best effort of imperfect people doing hard things for reasons they are still working out. But rest. This. Now. The sound of the city blurs. The cold of the room becomes simply the temperature of where you are. You are in your body. Your body is in this room. This room is in this building. This building is in this city. And this city is full of people breathing their Sunday night breaths, settling into their Sunday night sleeps, carrying their days into their dreams and finding them there, transformed, made strange, made sometimes bearable by the strange mercy of sleep that takes the difficult things and does something to them in the dark that you can't see and can't direct. You surrender to it. The way you surrender to all the things in this place that are larger than you and cannot be changed in a single week or a single month or a single person's effort, but which can be approached daily with chalk instead of nails, with lavender in the sluice, with 30 seconds at the window, with a good evening spoken into a cell that may or may not receive it, with the thing that is still yours to give, even here, the small things that matter. The bells fade, the gallery below you settles, and somewhere in the city, across Moorfields, past the cattle market, further than you can see from your small barred window, somewhere out there the river runs, the way it has always run, carrying everything on its dark surface, ships and ruin and hope and commerce, and all the ordinary traffic of a world that does not stop for anyone, that did not stop for George Appleton, and will not stop for you, but carries you, if you let it, carries you forward. One more week coming, one more morning with the bells and the cold and the smell finding you before your eyes open. One more round, one more cell, one more name, one more small thing. Let it come. Good night.